in the space between what we know and what we only think we know, there are stories that refuse to sleep. Not loud, not violent, just quietly impossible. A man appears with a passport from a country that doesn't exist. A book is written in a language no one can read. A group of hikers flee their tent into the cold and never come back. Their tracks lead nowhere. Their reasons unknown. These are the mysteries that live in the margins. The stories passed down in fragments, recorded in fading documents, whispered in long-forgotten corners of the world. The kind of mysteries that don't want to be solved, they just want to be remembered. You won't hear jump scares or wild theories here. Just a voice, a breath, and the slow unraveling of the strange. Each chapter is a thread, and together they form a tapestry of the unexplained. Some will make you wonder. Some will make you pause. And some might just make you question what's waiting just beyond the reach of understanding. So close your eyes, let the room grow still, and drift gently into the soft pull of the unknown. Because tonight, we're going somewhere deeper than dreams. This is Lore FM, and these are history's unsolved mysteries. Long before the bustle of modern cities and the hum of electric lights, there was a silence, a stillness that stretched over the untamed coasts of what we now call North Carolina. It was along this wild shore, bordered by dense forests and whispering winds, that a mystery began, one that would echo through centuries. A mystery carved in wood, wrapped in fog, and left behind like a question no one could answer. It was the summer of 1587. Over 100 settlers, men, women, and children, arrived on Roanoke Island, nestled in what was then known as the Virginia colony. They came from England, hoping to build new lives in the New World. Hope filled their sails. But the land was unfamiliar, the weather unpredictable. The native tribes nearby were sometimes welcoming, sometimes wary. Still, the settlers believed they could endure, could build something lasting. Leading them was Governor John White, a man who had already visited Roanoke on earlier expeditions. Alongside him was his daughter, Eleanor Dare, who would soon give birth to a baby girl. That child, Virginia Dare, became the first English child born in the Americas. Her birth was seen as a sign, a hopeful beginning for this fragile new colony. But even hope must bow to harsh realities. As supplies dwindled and tensions grew, Governor White made a difficult decision. He would return to England to gather more provisions. The settlers urged him to hurry back. He promised he would. But fate had its own plans. War broke out between England and Spain, and all ships were conscripted for defense. What should have been a short voyage turned into a delay that stretched for 3 long years. When Governor White finally returned to Roanoke in the late summer of 1590, what he found was not what he expected. The fort stood silent. The buildings were dismantled. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies. Only absence. The entire colony was gone. All that remained was a single word carved into a wooden post, Croatoan. White had instructed the settlers that if they were forced to leave, they should carve a sign, and if they left under duress, they should add a cross. There was no cross, just the one word, Croatoan. It was the name of a nearby island and of a friendly indigenous tribe. But when White sailed to the Croatoan island shortly after, he found no sign of the colonists there either. The trail ended there, and the silence resumed. Speculation began almost immediately. Had they been killed by hostile tribes? Had they tried to sail back to England on their own and been lost at sea? Or had they integrated peacefully with a local tribe, abandoning their English identity in exchange for survival? Years passed. Decades turned into centuries, and the mystery deepened. Some later explorers and settlers reported encountering indigenous people with gray eyes or knowledge of English customs. Others claimed to have seen European-style homes deep within tribal lands. But none of these accounts could be verified. They were whispers carried on the wind, fragments of something unknowable. Modern historians and archaeologists have tried to piece together the puzzle. Some believe the colonists may have split up, with small groups attempting to survive in different areas. Excavations on Hatteras Island, which was once called Croatoan, have uncovered European artifacts, including a sword hilt and a writing tablet. But whether these belong to the Roanoke settlers or to later explorers remains unclear. Another theory suggests that the settlers may have moved inland. On a map created by Governor White himself, modern researchers discovered hidden markings that could indicate a fortified settlement west of Roanoke. These clues have reignited searches even in the modern day. Yet, so far, nothing conclusive has been found. What makes the Roanoke mystery so enduring is its perfect combination of history, absence, and imagination. It invites the mind to wander, to picture the last days of the colony, to wonder whether they were filled with hope or fear, whether they were taken by force or walked away by choice, whether they left a mark on the land that has simply been lost to time. But time is good at keeping secrets, and Roanoke has remained one of its quietest faults. Even now, more than 400 years later, we know little more than Governor White did when he stood before the abandoned colony, his eyes scanning the tree line, his heart sinking with every silent moment. The wind still moves through the trees on Roanoke Island. The ocean still laps at its shores. But the voices that once filled the air are long gone. Only one word remains. A single message carved in wood. Croatoan. And perhaps, that was always meant to be the last word spoken. As the seasons turned and Roanoke Island was slowly reclaimed by nature, the story of the vanished colony passed into legend. It became something told around firesides in classrooms, in books and in hushed conversations. Not because of what was found, but because of what was never found. It is the kind of mystery that doesn't simply ask for answers. It asks for imagination. Centuries have passed since Governor White stood before the abandoned site. Yet, despite all the silence and dust, Roanoke refuses to disappear from the mind. Each generation that stumbles across the tale finds themselves pulled in by the same question. How could over 100 people simply vanish? Many believe the settlers may have joined the Croatoan people. It was the most peaceful theory. The tribe had been friendly during earlier encounters. Their island, now known as Hatteras Island, was nearby and accessible. For those abandoned in a harsh new world, forging a life with those who knew the land may have been a decision made not in desperation, but in wisdom. Stories from the 17 and 1800s describe tribes with European characteristics, light eyes, fluency in English, even Christian practices. Some claim these were the descendants of Roanoke settlers, absorbed into indigenous culture. But no hard proof ever surfaced. Oral traditions fade. Artifacts are moved, varied, forgotten. And time, as always, is not generous with clarity. Still, the theory of assimilation remains one of the most widely accepted. If true, it paints the mystery not as a tragedy, but as a quiet adaptation. A group of people realizing they would not survive as they were, choosing instead to become something new. Something untraceable. There are other theories, of course. More unsettling ones. Some believe the settlers were attacked, either by hostile tribes or by Spanish forces who were known to explore the same coastal regions. The Spanish were in conflict with the English at the time, and there were fears of raids. Yet no remains were ever found. No burned-out structures. No shattered weapons. Just empty ground and silence. If there had been violence, it left no trace. Others believe the colonists may have tried to flee. Perhaps they built boats and attempted to sail to another settlement, or even back to England. But these were not sailors, and the ocean has no memory. If their makeshift vessels sank, the water would have taken everything: bodies, belongings, stories. A more recent and intriguing discovery was found on an old map drawn by Governor White himself. In the early 2000s, researchers used modern imaging techniques and discovered a small, hidden marking under a patch. The mark appeared to indicate a fort, miles inland from Roanoke. Was this a potential relocation site? A backup plan never spoken aloud? Excavations near the location have turned up tantalizing clues, bits of pottery, tools, and other artifacts that may date to the late 1500s. But again, nothing definitive ties them to the lost colony. The earth offers hints, but never full answers. What makes the Roanoke disappearance so unique is the absence of narrative. Most mysteries give you something. A few final words. A locked room. A half-written letter. But Roanoke leaves almost nothing. It offers a single carved word, then falls silent forever. And yet, that silence has become its voice. It speaks in the pause between theories. In the stillness of the forest. In the wind that moves across the island at dusk. It asks us not only what happened, but why we care so much. Part of the mystery's power lies in the people involved. The settlers weren't just nameless pioneers. They included families, children, grandparents. Eleanor Dare and her daughter Virginia, whose very birth was a symbol of hope for England's expansion into the New World. That hope now lingers like a ghost, caught between possibility and loss. In later centuries, Virginia Dare would become a figure of legend. Poems films and novels romanticized her as a symbol of America's beginnings. Some claim she had grown up among native tribes, others imagined she transformed into a white doe, wandering the forest forever. These myths did not answer the mystery, but they kept it alive. They kept us listening. Roanoke, in many ways, is not just a place. It is a feeling. A question without a question mark. A door slightly ajar in the history books. Its power lies in what it doesn't say and what it doesn't show. It is not loud. It whispers. And those whispers have traveled far. They drift into classrooms where students hear of the colony for the first time. They echo through documentaries, novels, podcasts. And now, they settle gently here as you listen, somewhere quiet, somewhere still, letting the mystery wash over you like a tide that never recedes. What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? The question remains open. But perhaps that's the point. Not all stories are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be remembered. And as we drift further into this long night of unsolved tales, the island remains. The trees sway gently. The wind hums the word carved long ago. Croatoan. Even in the quiet corners of Roanoke Island today, the mystery lingers. The ground feels heavy with history, though it gives away so little. Visitors walk beneath the trees, feeling the hush of the past press in, soft but persistent. Every whisper of wind, every creak of the forest, feels like it could be a clue. But the clues remain elusive. What draws us back to Roanoke again and again may not be the hope of solving the mystery, but something else entirely. Something deeper. A human longing to understand what becomes of the forgotten. We do not like blank spaces in our stories. We reach for meaning, even when it isn't there. And Roanoke, in all its silence, is one of the oldest blank spaces in American history. Over time, Roanoke has been studied through every lens: archaeological, anthropological, linguistic, even genetic. Some researchers have searched for descendants through DNA testing, hoping to find traces of the settlers in modern Native American communities. The results have been fascinating, but inconclusive. The past does not always leave a perfect trail. Sometimes it simply fades. One of the most curious elements of the Roanoke mystery is the complete lack of physical remains. No bones. No graves. No final messages hidden under floorboards or in diaries. It is as though the colony evaporated. In a world that often leaves too much behind, Roanoke left almost nothing. There is something haunting in that emptiness. A colony of over 100 people vanished, and the only voice that remains is a single carved word. No other settlement in the New World left behind such an open-ended farewell. It reads less like a clue and more like a question etched into time. Theories continue to grow in number and creativity. Some are grounded in history. Others drift into the realm of the strange. There are whispers of curses, of supernatural disappearances, of time slips and portals. Some even speak of alien abduction, though those stories tend to fade under scrutiny. But they reveal something about us. When the facts run dry, our imaginations bloom. In the end, the mystery of Roanoke is as much about us as it is about the people who vanished. It's about what we fear, what we wonder, and what we need from our stories. Roanoke gives us no resolution. It offers only atmosphere, suggestion, and the echo of lives once lived. And maybe that is enough. Because there's something strangely comforting in knowing that some parts of history are unknowable. In a world driven by data, Roanoke reminds us that silence still has power. That mystery can still stretch across oceans and centuries and land softly in the ears of those trying to fall asleep, like you. Close your eyes and picture it now. The year is 1587. You are among those settlers, standing on the edge of a wild coast. The trees are dense. The sky is wide. You do not know what the future holds. But you have chosen to believe in something: survival, hope, legacy. You build homes, raise children, trying to make a new world from the soil. You are brave, but the land is vast, and help is far away. Years later, when no one hears from you, when your voices no longer echo across the Atlantic, someone comes looking. They find only the trees, and the wind, and the word: Croatoan. You have left no screams, no signs of struggle. Just silence. A silence louder than any cry for help. And now, centuries later, someone else is listening. Someone resting in a quiet room, wrapped in blankets, waiting for sleep to come. And in this peaceful moment, your story returns. Not as a tragedy, not as a failure, but as a mystery that lived on long after the fires went cold. Roanoke is not a tale of despair. It is a reminder of how stories endure, how people can vanish and still be remembered, how even when nothing remains, something always lingers. So as you lie back, breathing slowly, letting your thoughts drift like fog over a sleeping coastline, think of Roanoke not as a question needing an answer, but as a whisper that never truly left the air. Let the name echo one final time, Croatoan, and let the mystery rest, at least for now, as we continue our journey through history's quietest riddles. The city of Strasbourg was quiet in the early morning hours. Nestled along the Rhine River, its cobbled streets and timber-framed houses stood peacefully beneath the warm sun of midsummer. Birds chirped in the trees. Market stalls were being prepared for the day's trade. All was ordinary. All was calm. And then, she started dancing. It began with one woman. Her name has been lost to time, though some call her Frau Traffa. In the middle of the street, without music, without invitation, she moved. Not with joy or celebration. Not with laughter or song. She danced as if compelled by something unseen. As if the rhythm wasn't coming from the world around her, but from deep within. People watched from their windows. A few tried to speak with her, to calm her, to lead her away. But she did not stop. She danced through the day and into the night. Her movements were not elegant or practiced. They were frantic, desperate. And when the sun rose again the next morning, she was still moving. At first, the townspeople thought it a strange episode, an isolated incident. But then it spread. Within a week, dozens had joined her. Men and women, young and old, all dancing in the streets. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Others danced until their feet bled. Still others died, hearts giving out under the strain, bodies unable to keep pace with whatever force had taken hold. By the end of the month, more than 400 people had succumbed to the strange affliction. The streets of Strasbourg were filled with movement. The sound of shuffling feet and gasping breaths echoed down alleyways. There was no music, no festival, just endless, involuntary motion. And no one could explain why. The city's physicians and leaders were baffled. At the time, medicine was still a mixture of science, superstition, and guesswork. Some believed it was caused by overheated blood, and so they encouraged the dancers to continue, thinking they would eventually tire and recover. Musicians were even brought in, stages constructed, space cleared for what they called the healing dance. But the dancing did not heal. It only grew worse. Strasbourg was not the first city to experience such an event. Similar outbreaks had occurred across Europe in earlier centuries, Basel, Cologne, Metz. But none matched the scale or horror of what unfolded in the summer of 1518. This was not a celebration. It was a possession. What caused it? That question has never been answered with certainty. Some modern historians point to ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye and can cause hallucinations and muscle spasms when consumed. It is the same substance that would later be linked to accusations of witchcraft in colonial New England. Perhaps the people of Strasbourg had unknowingly eaten tainted bread. Perhaps their bodies were reacting to it in terrifying, uncontrollable ways. But there are flaws in that theory. Ergot poisoning rarely causes coordinated group behavior. It tends to isolate the sufferer, not synchronize them. And if the bread had been spoiled, more symptoms would likely have been reported: vomiting, seizures, visions. The dancers, however, seemed trapped in one specific state: movement. Another theory is psychological. The early 1500s were a time of great stress. The region had suffered from famine, disease, and political unrest. Death was a constant presence. Fear weighed heavy on every household. Perhaps, some say, the dancing was a form of mass hysteria, a collective psychological response to trauma, grief, and fear. A way for the mind to escape what the heart could not carry. But even that theory struggles to explain the physical toll. The exhaustion. The injuries. The deaths. Psychosomatic illness can cause many symptoms, but could it really drive someone to dance for days without rest? The truth is, we still do not know. What we do know is this: for one long, sweltering summer, the city of Strasbourg became a stage for something otherworldly. A city possessed not by spirits or soldiers, but by rhythm, by motion, by a strange, relentless dance. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. There was no single moment of silence. The dancers didn't fall in unison. The movement faded gradually, like a fever breaking. One by one, the afflicted returned to stillness. Some were taken to shrines outside the city. Others simply collapsed, never to rise again. The streets quieted, the music was silenced, and the city began to forget. But the memory remained, passed down through generations. A tale too strange to ignore, too mysterious to solve. A story that invites the same question over and over again. Why did they dance? The summer heat of Strasbourg did not lift as the dancers filled the streets. The sun glared down on their contorted forms. Shadows stretched long against the buildings, flickering with every frenzied motion. The air grew thick with sweat, dust, and something else, something unspoken. A fear that settled deep in the bones of every bystander. No one could explain it. No one could stop it. And no one could look away. For the city officials and physicians, the dancing became a crisis. It disrupted trade. It unnerved families. It challenged the very order of daily life. In a world still governed by divine will and earthly superstition, this spectacle stirred unease. And as more bodies joined the strange procession, the sense of helplessness deepened. Some of the dancers pleaded for rest, their mouths forming silent cries. But their limbs disobeyed. Their bodies moved as if under command, ignoring exhaustion, ignoring pain. Witnesses described their faces as blank, eyes wide but unseeing. They were not dancing for joy. They were not dancing for ritual. They were simply dancing until they couldn't. In desperation, the authorities tried to respond. Their first solution was not to stop the dancing, but to give it space. They believed the movement was a kind of sickness that needed to be expressed fully. So they cleared areas of the city, even building stages. Musicians were hired to provide rhythm, as if organizing the chaos might contain it. But instead of relief, the effort only extended the suffering. Music gave structure to the madness. The rhythm seemed to give the dancers new energy, pushing them further into exhaustion. Drummers and pipers played as the afflicted collapsed, were carried away, or in some cases, died right there, on the wood of the stage they had never asked for. Some reports claimed that up to 15 people a day were dying, their bodies unable to endure the unending motion. The city's belief that dancing was the cure became impossible to defend. And so, the strategy changed. The dancers were no longer encouraged. They were removed. City leaders, in a mix of fear and repentance, sent the afflicted to a mountaintop shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, a figure once associated with healing and, ironically, dancing. The hope was that prayer and pilgrimage might cleanse the strange compulsion. The journey was difficult. The dancers, some still moving involuntarily, were carried up into the hills. Their feet were bound in red shoes. They were placed at the altar and made to walk in circles, to touch sacred relics, to beg for forgiveness. Slowly, some began to return to stillness. Others wept, overcome by emotion, their bodies finally at rest. No one could say exactly why it worked. No one could say why the plague had begun, or why it ended. Back in Strasbourg, the city returned to its routine. Merchants reopened their stalls. Children played in the alleys again. The sound of drums was replaced by the sound of footsteps, of carts, of life resuming. But something had shifted. A shadow had passed through, and even though it had moved on, its outline lingered. Those who survived the dancing did not always return to normal. Some were left physically broken, others mentally scarred. A few would never speak of what they felt during those endless hours of motion. Perhaps they couldn't. Perhaps they were afraid the feeling might return. Outside the city, word of the plague spread. It became a subject of fascination, of warning, of rumor. Religious leaders claimed it was divine punishment. Physicians blamed bad blood or hot vapors rising from the earth. Others said the stars were misaligned, or that the moon's pull had gone wrong. No one could agree. No one really knew. Even now, centuries later, the mystery holds. Historians study the reports, piecing together old journals, city records, letters. Some propose that the dancers had entered a trance state induced by mass trauma. Others lean toward a cultural theory, suggesting that in a world of deep suffering, the body had found a voice the mind could not form. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps, in the heat of 1518, the people of Strasbourg were not just caught in a plague, but in a performance of their own unspoken grief. A dance born from hunger, fear, and the overwhelming weight of being alive. But the records, as always, are incomplete. The dancers did not leave behind detailed notes. No personal confessions. Just the movement and the memory. What remains is the image. A quiet street overtaken by bodies in motion. Faces blank. Feet moving to a rhythm no one could hear. The sun watching, the city still. And the question, always the question, why? As time moved on and the world changed, the events in Strasbourg began to fade from the forefront of memory. The city evolved. The cobbled streets that once echoed with restless footsteps were paved over. New buildings rose. New problems came. But somewhere, buried beneath layers of time, the story of the dancers remained, half forgotten, half remembered. For those who still study it, the dancing plague is more than an odd footnote. It's a window into a fragile time. A moment when the boundaries between body and mind, spirit and society, were stretched too thin. The people of Strasbourg, already burdened by hunger, plague, and war, carried invisible weights. And then, for reasons no one can fully explain, they began to move. Some believe the plague was an act of protest, not loud or angry, but silent and physical. A way to express something that could not be spoken aloud. In a time when emotions were often suppressed, when fear was constant and suffering commonplace, the dance may have been the only language left. Others argue it was a deeply social event, one that fed off shared anxiety. When one person lost control, others followed. The more people danced, the more people believed it was inevitable. A contagious belief that took shape in motion. And perhaps, in a time when science was scarce and the supernatural was still a daily presence, belief itself was more powerful than reason. But the truth may never be known. The dancing plague defies easy explanation. It doesn't fit neatly into any category. It was neither illness nor ritual, neither rebellion nor celebration. It existed for a moment, impossible and undeniable, then vanished. What it leaves behind is something quieter. A feeling. A reminder that the human experience is not always logical. That fear, grief, and desperation can take strange forms. That sometimes the body carries truths the mind cannot bear to hold. There is a kind of poetry in it, too. The image of hundreds of people moving in unison, not for joy but for survival. Not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't stop. Their feet ached, their breath caught, but they danced. Through pain, through exhaustion, through whatever force had taken hold of them. It is not the kind of dance we usually imagine. There was no grace, no music. Only a rhythm born in silence, carried forward by those who could not break free. And yet, even in its mystery, the dancing plague connects us. Across centuries. Across cultures. Because at its heart, it is about being overwhelmed. About the weight of the world pressing down until something gives way. About the strange, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying ways that human beings try to cope. Perhaps that is why it still haunts us. It's not just the strangeness of the event, though that alone would be enough. It's the sense that it could happen again. That under the right pressure, in the right place, at the right time, the line between control and chaos might blur once more. Not in the same way. Not in the streets of a quiet European city. But somewhere, somehow, the body might once again become a messenger for what the soul cannot express. There have been echoes. Small ones. Modern incidents of mass hysteria. Contagious behavior spreading through schools, workplaces, even online communities. Laughter that won't stop. Feigning spells without explanation. Strange tics that move through groups like invisible winds. These modern cases are smaller, less deadly. But they remind us that the line between individual and collective experience is thinner than we like to believe. Strasbourg in 1518 was not so different from the world we know. The people were anxious. Their routines were disrupted. Their faith was being tested, and into that uncertainty walked a woman who could not stop moving, who planted a seed of chaos with every involuntary step, a seed that grew and spread and, for one unforgettable summer, became something no one could explain. And now, as you lie in the quiet of your own space, you can let that image rest beside you. The flicker of a candle in a wooden window frame, the sound of distant footsteps on cobblestone, a crowd of people dancing not with joy, but with something deeper. Something older, something unnamed. Let it drift into the background like a dream half remembered, a rhythm just out of reach. The city has long since stilled. The dancers have all gone, but the story remains, quiet, waiting, like a breath held in time. And somewhere, deep in the folds of history, the dance continues. There is a book. It sits under glass now, in the Yale University Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library. But for centuries, it passed quietly through the hands of scholars, collectors, and mystics, its pages filled with writing that no one could understand. A manuscript written in an unknown language, with strange, looping letters and curious drawings. A book that speaks, but no one knows what it says. It is known today as the Voynich Manuscript, a name given to it not by its author, but by Wilfred Voynich, a rare book dealer who discovered it in 1912. He found it tucked inside a box of old volumes belonging to a Jesuit college in Italy. From the moment he opened it, he knew he had found something extraordinary. The manuscript is small, about the size of a standard notebook, but inside are over 200 pages, all covered in strange symbols. The text flows smoothly, as though written fluently, yet the alphabet does not match any known script. It appears to be a language, or something like a language, but no one has ever decoded it. And then there are the illustrations. Delicate, hand-drawn images fill the margins and full pages. There are plants, some that resemble known herbs, others that seem to grow only in the imagination. There are diagrams of stars, suns, and moons arranged in circular patterns. And there are women, naked, often bathing in green pools, or connected by intricate tubes and patterns, like they're part of some unknown biological process. The manuscript is divided into sections based on these drawings: botanical, astronomical, biological, and pharmaceutical. Each section adds to the mystery. None of the images are labeled in a recognizable way. No index, no glossary, just a flowing, silent rhythm of ink and curiosity. What makes the Voynich Manuscript truly unsettling is not just that it's undeciphered. It's that, after centuries of study, there is still no consensus on what it even is. Some believe it is a medieval medical book, written in a lost cipher known only to a few. Others say it's a hoax, a meaningless invention, made to look scholarly and mysterious. But even that theory is difficult to accept. The script is too consistent. The illustrations too purposeful. Whoever made it, if it is indeed a forgery, went to extraordinary lengths to sustain the illusion of sense. Radiocarbon dating of the parchment has placed the creation of the manuscript in the early 1500s, specifically between 1400 and early 1540. This matches the materials used in the style of illustration. But the ink has proven harder to date, and the origin of the author remains unknown. Many brilliant minds have tried to break the code. Linguists, cryptographers, historians, even military code breakers during wartime. No one has succeeded. Some believe the language follows real patterns, suggesting meaning. Others argue it is constructed gibberish, designed to mimic language without saying anything at all. Artificial intelligence has even been used to search for statistical consistencies. Some researchers claim that certain word patterns resemble natural language. Others suggest it could be glossolalia, a type of writing produced in a trance-like state without conscious control. Language, but not of the conscious world. Theories multiply. Some believe it was the work of an alchemist, hiding secret knowledge. Others say it was written by a woman, perhaps as a private journal in a code only she could understand. A few have even proposed that it was not written by a human at all. But through all the speculation, the manuscript remains mute. It does not give up its secrets. Its pages remain as mysterious as the day they were bound. And so, the Voynich Manuscript continues to exist in a strange space. Not forgotten, but not understood. A relic of a past that may never have existed as we imagine. A voice without a listener. Perhaps that's what makes it so captivating. It invites you to lean closer, to try, to guess, to imagine, and maybe that's enough. Because sometimes, a mystery doesn't need to be solved to be worth remembering. Sometimes, the mystery is the story. The more you stare at the Voynich Manuscript, the stranger it becomes. Each page is an invitation into a world that feels almost familiar, yet forever out of reach. The illustrations have a rhythm to them, an order that suggests meaning. Stars in orbits, plants with roots and stems, women moving through cycles. There is repetition. There is balance. But there is no clarity. Some pages contain elaborate wheels, drawn with suns and moons, like forgotten calendars or star charts. Constellations float in delicate arrangements, but none of them match any known celestial maps. They are either entirely fictional or drawn from a system of thought that has long been lost. In the biological section, the drawings take on an even more surreal quality. Women are shown in strange, ritual-like scenes, submerged in green pools, standing inside what look like vessels, tubes, or chambers. Their bodies are sometimes connected by thin lines, as though part of a network or flow. It's as if the manuscript is describing an unknown system of health, reproduction, or energy, something intimate but encoded beyond recognition. The text flows around these images in tidy blocks. Lines are even. Letters are consistently formed. There are no obvious mistakes. No corrections. Whoever wrote the Voynich Manuscript was confident. This was not a draft. It was written with purpose, perhaps even with pride. But why? And for whom? There is no author's name. No dedication. No hints, even in the margins, of who created the book or why. And yet, it was clearly made to be seen. The care in the script. The detail in the art. This was not something to be buried. It was meant to be opened. Wilfred Voynich, the man who brought the manuscript to public attention in the early 1900s, believed he had uncovered a key to lost knowledge. He thought it might be the work of Roger Bacon, a 13th century English philosopher and scientist known for his interest in alchemy and hidden wisdom. Voynich hoped the book would change our understanding of medieval science. But no evidence ever confirmed Bacon as the author. Later studies revealed the manuscript was probably written a century or more after Bacon's time. Its parchment came from calfskin, clean and durable, typical of early Renaissance manuscripts. It had been carefully prepared, cut, bound, and ruled with faint lines to guide the scribe's hand. Even the ink has its own story. It was made from common ingredients of the time, like iron gall and other plant-based compounds. It shows no signs of modern tampering. The manuscript is old, authentically old, but its meaning remains entirely modern in its mystery. As time passed, theories grew stranger. Some claimed the book was a lost language, an early form of a known tongue, perhaps written phonetically or encoded for secrecy. Others believed it was a cipher, and dozens of attempts were made to crack it using frequency analysis, pattern recognition, and substitution methods. Every so often, someone announces a breakthrough. A scholar decodes a phrase. A machine learning algorithm reveals a pattern. But these moments fade. The meaning slips through the fingers, unprovable, unrepeatable. A breakthrough one day is disproven the next. Even more unusual theories have found their way into the manuscript's long shadow. Some believe the Voynich Manuscript is a work of art, an elaborate creation meant to evoke wonder, not meaning. A kind of literary illusion. Others suggest it was written by someone with a unique neurological condition, such as an extreme form of aphasia or hypergraphia, compelled to write, but in a language of their own. And still others whisper about origins far beyond Earth, imagining that the book is a message not just from another time, but from another world. A voice calling out in alien script, waiting for someone, anyone, who might understand. But the truth, if there is one, remains just beyond reach. The manuscript has been studied in nearly every way possible. Its materials dated. Its illustrations cataloged. Its text digitized and examined by some of the world's most powerful computers. And still, nothing. It exists in a quiet defiance of answers. A puzzle whose edges don't quite meet. A question that refuses to be solved. And perhaps that is why it endures. Because in a world full of noise, the Voynich Manuscript remains silent. And in that silence, we hear something we rarely do anymore, the thrill of not knowing. There's something deeply human about the desire to decode, to pull meaning from symbols, to turn mystery into knowledge. The Voynich Manuscript resists that instinct. It draws the curious in with the promise of secrets, only to leave them turning pages in silence. In many ways, it has become more than a book. It is a mirror, one that reflects the endless search for understanding. No one knows how many people have touched the manuscript over the centuries. Names appear in its journey: collectors, monks, emperors, dealers. At one point, it was believed to have belonged to Emperor Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire. He was known for his obsession with the occult and alchemy. He reportedly paid a large sum for the manuscript, convinced it held great knowledge. If true, the manuscript may have passed through secret chambers and candlelit studies, pondered by some of the most eccentric minds in Europe. But all that remains is suggestion. The paper trail is incomplete. Even its early history is as mysterious as the writing itself. Some letters found with the manuscript suggest it was once examined by a 17th century scholar named Athanasius Kircher. He was known for his attempts to understand ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs long before the Rosetta Stone. Kircher never cracked the Voynich either, though records show he tried. And so, it waited. Quietly. Centuries passed before it reached Wilfred Voynich, who gave it his name and brought it into modern light. He died before discovering anything more about it. His widow continued his work. And after her death, it passed again from hand to hand until it was finally donated to Yale in 1969. Today, you can view the entire manuscript online. High-resolution scans make every page accessible. Scholars still pore over its contents. Amateur code breakers form online communities dedicated to cracking it. There are blogs, forums, and digital archives. The mystery has moved from parchment to pixels, but it remains just as stubborn. Even with all the technology at our fingertips, the manuscript holds its silence. Perhaps it always will. That silence, though, has power. It invites imagination. What if the book was a personal diary, never meant to be read? What if it was written by someone who believed deeply in their own system of understanding, one we simply don't share? Or maybe, it was never meant to be read at all. That's one of the most haunting ideas. That the Voynich Manuscript is not a puzzle to solve, but a performance. A crafted illusion, meant to evoke wonder, curiosity, and confusion. A work of art designed not to tell, but to suggest. Not to instruct, but to provoke. And if that is true, then it has succeeded perfectly. Because here we are, centuries later, still wondering. Still staring at the shapes on the page. Still trying to hear what was never spoken. There's a quiet comfort in that. In knowing that some things resist translation, that not every message needs a meaning, that mystery, in its own way, can be a kind of answer. When you picture the manuscript now, you might imagine its pages turning slowly beneath soft light, ink faded but steady, lines curling across cream-colored parchment. The drawings, strange, delicate, unknowable, float in silence. No voice speaks, no key unlocks the code. And maybe that's exactly how it's meant to be. Because the Voynich Manuscript is more than an unsolved riddle. It's a reminder that curiosity is its own reward, that wonder does not require answers, and that, sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones we can never quite explain. Let the book rest now. Let its pages close in your mind like the final note of a forgotten psalm. The symbols are still there, waiting. The meaning may come one day, or it may never arrive. But the mystery will always remain. And that is its gift. In the northern Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia, where the winds bite hard and the snow falls in endless sheets, there lies a pass with a quiet name and a chilling history. Locals call it Dyatlov Pass, named after the leader of an expedition that never returned. It is a place where cold and silence rule, and where something, no one knows quite what, went terribly wrong. It was January of 1959. A group of 9 experienced hikers, all young students or recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, set out on a skiing expedition deep into the mountains. Their goal was simple: reach Mount Otorden, a remote peak in the Ural Range. They were well prepared, seasoned in survival, and confident in their journey. The team was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his discipline and leadership. Alongside him were 8 others, men and women in their 20s. All were fit, intelligent, and well-trained in harsh conditions. They carried maps, cameras, diaries, and the quiet excitement of adventure. The route was difficult, but nothing they hadn't faced before. After reaching a small village near the base of the mountains, they began their ascent into the icy wilderness. On the 1st of February, they made camp on the slope of a peak known to the local Mansi people as Kolat Cycle, a name that translates to Dead Mountain. That night would be their last. When the group failed to return as scheduled, a search party was organized. At first, the delay was assumed to be minor, just weather or fatigue. But days passed, then weeks, and what the rescuers eventually found turned a simple tragedy into one of the most perplexing mysteries in modern history. The hiker's tent was discovered on the side of the mountain, but it was not upright. It had been torn from the inside, sliced open, as if those within had cut their way out in a rush to escape something. Not through the front flap, but through the canvas itself. Footprints led away from the tent, barefoot in the snow, some wearing only socks, others without shoes or coats. The tracks wandered down the slope for several hundred meters, then vanished into the snowdrift. And then, one by one, the bodies were found. The first 2 were near a tree line, lying side by side without shoes, dressed in only undergarments. Between them, the remains of a small fire. Nearby branches had been broken several meters high, as if someone had climbed in panic or desperation. 3 more bodies were found scattered between the tree line and the tent, as if trying to crawl back. Their positions suggested confusion, disorientation. Something had gone terribly wrong. It wasn't until 2 months later that the last 4 bodies were discovered, buried beneath deep snow in a ravine. And these 4 told a different story, one of unimaginable force and unexplained trauma. One woman's chest had been crushed, another's skull fractured, and one, perhaps the most unsettling, was missing her tongue. Not torn out violently, but cleanly absent, as though removed with precision. Stranger still, medical reports showed no external bruising on some of the worst injuries. The internal damage was severe, equivalent to the force of a car crash, but the skin remained largely intact. No defensive wounds. No signs of struggle with another person. The temperature that night had dipped below -30°C, but these students had faced cold before. They were dressed for survival. They were trained, and yet they had fled their only shelter in the middle of the night, into the snow, without shoes, without jackets. Something had made them run. No one could agree on what. The Soviet authorities launched an investigation, but it yielded few answers. Officially, the cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. What that meant was left undefined. The case was quietly closed, and for decades, sealed away from public view. But the questions remained. What could drive 9 intelligent, skilled hikers to flee into freezing darkness? Why were some of them injured in ways that made no physical sense? And why, in all the pages of evidence and photos recovered from the scene, was there never a clear sign of what truly happened? In the years that followed, the Dyatlov Pass incident became one of the most enduring and chilling mysteries of the 20th century. A tale of cold wind, broken tents, silent footprints, and bodies left behind. And it had only just begun. The images left behind from Dyatlov Pass are haunting in their stillness. Black and white photographs found in the hikers' cameras show smiles, campfires, and playful poses. Snow-covered slopes. Friends arm in arm. Faces relaxed, unaware of what lay ahead. These final glimpses, frozen in time, make the mystery all the more unsettling. Because nothing in those photos hints at fear. And yet, fear came. As investigators combed the site, they recorded details that deepened the confusion. The tent, partially buried in snow, had been pitched securely. Inside were belongings left behind in haste, boots, jackets, food, a flashlight still resting on the surface, oddly switched on but undisturbed. It was as if something invisible had pushed its way into their lives and forced them out without warning. But what? Over the years, explanations have been offered, each more intriguing than the last. One early theory suggested an avalanche. Perhaps the group had heard the low rumble of shifting snow and, fearing a collapse, slashed their way out of the tent and fled down the slope. But those who examined the site argued that there was no evidence of an avalanche. The tent was still standing. Nearby trees were undisturbed, and the distribution of the bodies didn't align with how snow typically buries victims. Others speculated about a katabatic wind, an intense, sudden gust of frigid air that rushes down mountain slopes with violent speed. Such winds have been known to flatten tents and disorient even trained climbers. Perhaps the group panicked, fled into the night, and became separated. The theory might explain the initial flight, but not the strange injuries, not the crushed ribs or missing tongue. Then there were the more unusual ideas. Some whispered about secret military tests. The area was remote, and the Soviet Union was known for its secrecy. Could the hikers have stumbled upon something they were not meant to see? Experiments with weapons, parachute mines, soundless explosions. This theory found traction in the odd burn marks on some of the clothing, and reports, though unconfirmed, of strange orange lights in the sky that night, witnessed by others in the region. Radiation was detected on some of the victims' clothes. Not high enough to be lethal, but present. Where had it come from? Was it environmental? Had the clothing been exposed before the trip began? The answers were vague, and the records incomplete. And then there were the footsteps. Tracked in the snow, they showed no signs of panic. They were measured, calm, walking in single file away from the tent. Not the frantic scattering of people in terror, but the strange procession of a group moving with eerie control. What had led them down the slope so silently? Theories multiplied. Some invoked the supernatural, ancient spirits, curses. The mountain's name, Colette Cycle, Dead Mountain, only added to the aura. Could the land itself have held a power unknown to outsiders? Others turned to infrasound, low-frequency vibrations produced by wind, capable of causing unease, dizziness, or fear. If a weather pattern had created such conditions that night, perhaps the group became overwhelmed by a sense of dread, fleeing without understanding why. Each theory carried pieces of truth, but none fit the entire puzzle. The missing tongue, the strange injuries, the calm footsteps, the flashlight resting on the snow. And so the story endured. In the decades that followed, the Dyatlov mystery passed from official reports to whispered legend. It became a cautionary tale for hikers, a favorite topic of paranormal researchers, a thread that wove itself into the darker corners of modern folklore. Books were written, documentaries filmed, tourists began to visit the site, placing memorials in the snow. The pass was officially renamed in honor of Igor Dyatlov, but even the gesture did not bring closure, because what happened that night remains unsolved. 9 lives were lost under the stars, in a place too remote for rescue and too silent for answers. They fled not into danger, but into death, and the wind, as always, covered their tracks. Only fragments remain, torn canvas, broken branches, pages from a journal, in the cold. Always the cold. What makes the Dyatlov Pass mystery endure is not just what was found, but what wasn't. No eyewitnesses, no final message, no explanation that feels complete. Just silence, and snow, and a group of young hikers whose lives ended far from home, wrapped in questions that still echo through the mountains. Their story is often told with facts, timelines, maps, the who, where, and when. But beyond the details is something harder to define. A feeling. That sense of something unnatural having touched the edge of our world and slipped away before it could be seen. Igor Dyatlov and his team had been close. Friends. Teammates. They shared food, laughter, hardship. Their journal entries, found intact in the snow, are lighthearted and hopeful. The last photos taken show smiles. Jokes written in the margins. They had no reason to expect what was coming. That's perhaps what haunts people the most. There was no warning, no hint of fear until the very end. Then the tent slashed open from within. The barefoot tracks, the scattered bodies, the unanswered why. One of the final theories to gain attention came from a group of Russian scientists who revisited the case decades later. They used advanced simulations and forensic models to support a revised avalanche theory, one that could explain the sudden panic, the injuries, and the strange positioning of the bodies. According to their findings, a block of snow may have slid onto the tent, causing injuries that were internal but not immediately fatal. In the darkness and confusion, the hikers fled, hoping to regroup. But even this theory leaves gaps. It still cannot explain the radiation, the clean cuts in the tent, the calmness of the footsteps, the missing tongue. Every theory bends under the weight of too many questions. And so, many choose to stop searching. Not because they are satisfied, but because they understand. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. The Ural Mountains remain a quiet place. Snow falls in thick layers. Trees stand like sentinels, untouched by time. And at Dyatlov Pass, there is a stone memorial. 9 names, carved not just into rock, but into history. For the families of the hikers, the years that followed brought few answers. The official investigation ended with vague language, a compelling natural force. No one could say what that force was. No one could tell them exactly how or why their children had died. But the hikers are remembered. Each one had dreams, ambitions, futures imagined but never lived. Their notebooks were filled with plans, their packs with provisions and hope. They were not lost souls or thrill seekers. They were bright minds, exploring the edge of the world. And in that edge, something happened. Something so strange, so out of place, that even now, people return to it, hoping to see what they could not. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become more than an event. It is a story passed from voice to voice, told in whispers and retellings. It invites not only investigation, but reflection. On how quickly the familiar can turn unknown. On how deeply nature can keep its secrets. And on how some paths, once taken, never quite lead home. As you breathe softly now, you might picture the camp as it once was. A campus tent glowing faintly with lantern light. Laughter. Warm hands passing food. A journal open on someone's lap. The mountains stretching out in the darkness beyond. Then the snow begins to fall. And the wind begins to howl. And something, no one knows what, arrives in the silence. Not with footsteps. Not with voice. just presence. Invisible, undeniable. By morning, there is nothing but the mountain. Quiet. Still. As if nothing had ever been there at all. But the story remains. It lingers in the frost. In the photographs. In the footprints half buried by time. In the hearts of those who continue to wonder, to remember, to ask. What really happened at Dyatlov Pass? The mountain doesn't say. And the wind keeps the secret. It was Christmas Eve in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. The year was 1945. Snow dusted the rooftops. Homes flickered with colored lights. And inside the Sodder household, the smell of pine and warm food filled the air. The family was large. George and Jenny Sodder had 10 children in total, though only 9 were at home that night. They lived in a 2-story house just outside of town. George Sodder, a hard-working businessman, had built a comfortable life for his family. That Christmas Eve, 5 of the younger children asked their mother if they could stay up late to play with toys. She agreed, as long as they remembered to turn off the lights, close the curtains, and lock the front door before heading to bed. Jenny Sodder fell asleep early, with her youngest child, Sylvia, in a crib beside her. George had already gone to bed. By midnight, the home was quiet. Then, something broke the silence. At around 1 in the morning, Jenny was awakened by the sharp ring of the telephone. She answered, confused, and heard a woman's voice she didn't recognize. The caller asked for someone who didn't live there. Laughter and clinking glasses echoed in the background. When Jenny told her she had the wrong number, the woman simply laughed again and hung up. Jenny walked through the house. The lights were still on. The curtains hadn't been drawn. The front door was unlocked. But seeing nothing out of place, she returned to bed. A short time later, she was jolted awake by a loud thud on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. Then silence. Moments later, the scent of smoke reached her nose. She ran to the hallway and saw flames creeping up the walls. The house was on fire. Chaos followed. George and Jenny rushed to gather their children. They grabbed Sylvia from her crib, then raced to wake the older kids. 2 of their sons escaped through a window. But 5 of the children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were never seen again. In the panic, George tried everything to reach them. He smashed a window, cutting himself badly. He tried to climb the side of the house but couldn't. The family's ladder, always kept beside the house, was missing. He then attempted to move his coal truck to climb on top, but the engine wouldn't start, though it had worked earlier that day. In a matter of minutes, the fire had consumed the home. By dawn, it had burned to the ground. The local fire department, small and poorly equipped, didn't respond until later that morning. When they finally searched the ashes, they found no bones, no remains, nothing to indicate the 5 missing children had perished in the flames. Officials declared it a tragic fire. They claimed the heat had been so intense that the bodies were completely cremated. But the Sodders didn't believe it. Jenny Sodder, in particular, could not accept the explanation. She began conducting small experiments, burning animal bones in her oven, gathering expert opinions. Everyone told her the same thing. Even in the hottest fires, bones remain. So where were her children? In the weeks and months that followed, the Sodders searched for answers. Strange details began to emerge. A phone repairman told them the house's phone line had been deliberately cut, not damaged by the fire. A witness claimed to have seen someone stealing a block and tackle from the property, a tool possibly used to disable George's truck. Another neighbor said she had seen a man watching the Sodder home in the days before Christmas. A bus driver passing by that night said he saw balls of fire being thrown onto the roof. Theories began to grow. Whispers of kidnapping, of a planned arson, of something far more deliberate than a simple house fire. The Sodders believed their children had been taken. And so, the search began, not for remains, but for proof that the children were still alive. In the months after the fire, the Sodder family refused to let go of hope. Their home was gone. Their world had changed. But the question burned brighter than the flames ever had. What happened to the children? George and Jenny searched tirelessly for answers. They placed ads in newspapers, wrote to law enforcement officials, and hired private investigators. They were convinced this wasn't a tragic accident, but something far more sinister. And slowly, whispers from the outside world began to trickle in. A woman from a nearby town claimed she saw the missing children watching the fire from a passing car that night. Another witness, a hotel employee in Charleston, said she saw 4 of the children with 2 unfamiliar men and 2 women, all appearing nervous, speaking in a foreign language. The children, she said, matched the photographs shown to her afterward, but the reports led nowhere. Time passed, and the leads grew stranger. A letter arrived from a woman in St. Louis, claiming the children were being held in a convent. Another person in Florida believed the kids were adopted by a wealthy family. In Texas, a bar patron overheard a conversation about the Sodder case and claimed one of the men involved admitted to knowing what had really happened. The Sodders followed every lead, every rumor. They drove across the country, chasing whispers, questioning strangers, clinging to every possibility. Some tips were cruel hoaxes, others simply dead ends, but they never stopped searching. Jenny, in particular, became consumed with finding proof. She wore black every day for the rest of her life, mourning children who might still be alive. She planted a flower garden on the site of the destroyed house and tended it daily, hoping it would somehow keep their memory present. That if her children were out there, they'd feel it. That love could stretch across any distance. One of the most haunting moments came in the early 1960s. More than 15 years after the fire, Jenny received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man. On the back, someone had written, Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Elil Boys. A90132 or 35. The handwriting was erratic, the meaning unclear, but the image, it looked strikingly like Louis, one of the missing Sodder children. The family was stunned. They sent the photo to investigators, but no conclusive answers followed. George and Jenny believed the message was a clue, a sign their son might still be alive. They even hired another private detective to travel to Kentucky, where the letter was postmarked. The man vanished and was never heard from again. Desperate and determined, the Sodders created a billboard near their home, an enormous sign featuring the faces of the 5 missing children, a timeline of events, and a bold question: what was their fate? For decades, the billboard stood as a symbol of loss, persistence, and the quiet scream of unanswered questions. Drivers passing through Fayetteville would see it and wonder. Some would stop. Others would call. The Sodders answered every phone call, opened every letter. They never gave up. Theories continued to grow. Some believed the children had been kidnapped by someone connected to George's past. He had strong opinions about politics, especially against Benito Mussolini, and some in the Italian-American community had disagreed with him. Had someone sought revenge? Had a warning been ignored? The family had received threatening calls before. One man had even visited to ask about insurance and warned that your house will go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. The comment had seemed strange at the time, but in hindsight, chilling. Other theories were simpler. A robbery gone wrong. An arson meant to scare that went further than intended. But these explanations didn't account for the missing bodies, the silence, the lack of remains. And so, the mystery deepened. Not into darkness, but into something quieter. A soft ache that lingered for years, then decades. A mother and father staring at an empty place at the dinner table. Wondering, remembering, hoping. Because even without proof, they believed. Years passed, but the questions surrounding the Sodder children never faded. The fire, the vanishing, the strange letters and sightings, all of it remained suspended in time. Fayetteville moved on, but the Sodder family could not. They had rebuilt their home nearby, raised their remaining children, and continued to work. But every holiday, every birthday, came with the quiet shadow of absence. The billboard stayed up for nearly 4 decades, with George frequently repainting it himself. It became a landmark, not just in West Virginia, but across the country. Travelers wrote letters, newspapers printed stories, and curious minds speculated on what might have happened on that cold December night in 1945. George passed away in 1969, still without answers. His grief had followed him to the end. Jenny lived for nearly 20 more years. Her black mourning clothes never changed. The garden she planted over the ashes bloomed each spring, a fragile act of resistance against forgetting. Their remaining children carried the mystery forward. Over time, some of them became more private. Others remained publicly committed to keeping the case alive. But all of them lived with the ache of not knowing. The hope that maybe, just maybe, the 5 children had survived. That somewhere, someone knew the truth. Many found it hard to believe that 5 bodies could vanish so completely. The fire had burned quickly, yes, but the appliances in the basement were still identifiable. A few fragments of the roof had survived. If the flames could not destroy metal, could they really destroy bone? In the official report, investigators insisted the fire had been hot enough to cremate the children. But Jenny Sodder never accepted that. She spoke with crematorium directors, forensic experts, and anyone who might have knowledge of fire behavior. Over and over, she was told the same thing. House fires, even intense ones, do not burn long enough or hot enough to completely destroy human remains. Then there was the curious matter of the phone line. Initial reports claimed it had melted in the fire, but further examination suggested it had been cut, intentionally, and from outside the home. The ladder that George always kept propped against the house had been found tossed down a nearby embankment. His trucks, which he had tried to use during the emergency, both failed to start, despite working fine the day before. The signs were small, scattered, but they built a case not of tragedy, but of sabotage. Theories continued to swirl. That the children had been kidnapped by someone involved in organized crime. That they had been trafficked. That someone close to the family had helped cover up what really happened. Every lead was a thread pulled too tight, unraveling with no real resolution. Despite the gaps, the story remained alive, part cautionary tale, part unsolved riddle. The Sodder case was included in books, radio broadcasts, and eventually, television programs. Some modern investigators have tried to apply forensic techniques to the old records, but too much time has passed. The evidence, like the fire, is scattered and silent. In later years, one of the surviving Sodder sons, George Jr., spoke quietly about the case. He said that as painful as it had been to lose his siblings, the not knowing had been worse. A wound that could never fully close. Because grief has a rhythm, a path, but uncertainty never sleeps. Today, the original billboard is gone, but the memory remains. The Sodder case reminds us that even ordinary families, living in quiet towns, can find themselves caught in the center of something inexplicable. That the most haunting mysteries don't always involve ghosts or ancient relics, but missing voices, empty rooms, and lives pause without warning. As the night deepens and the air grows still, imagine the home once filled with warmth and laughter. Stockings hum, toys scattered on the floor, children drifting to sleep beneath a decorated tree, a mother and father wrapping gifts, not knowing it would be the last normal evening they'd ever have. The fire came. The morning after changed everything. But love remained. It clung to the broken bricks. It grew in a garden of remembrance. It stood tall on a billboard facing the highway. And it whispered in the hearts of those who believed the truth was still out there, waiting. Because the Sodder family never truly gave up. And neither has the mystery. Long ago, in the rolling countryside of medieval England, nestled between farmland and quiet woods, there was a small village called Woolpit. Its name came from the deep wolf pits dug nearby, traps used to protect livestock from roaming predators. But the story for which Woolpit is best remembered has nothing to do with wolves. It has to do with two children who appeared from the earth like a dream, or a ghost. The year was sometime in the 1200s. Accounts differ slightly, as the story passed from one chronicler to another. But what they agree on is this: during harvest season, when the sun was high and the fields golden, villagers discovered two children near one of the wolf pits. A boy and a girl. They were disoriented, frightened, and clinging to each other. They spoke a language no one recognized. Their clothes were made from unfamiliar material. But what stunned the villagers most was the color of their skin. It was green. Not a pale sickness. Not a faint tint. But a distinct, verdant hue, like fresh spring leaves. Their faces were human. Their features delicate. But the green cast of their skin set them apart as something strange. Something other. At first, the villagers were unsure what to do. The children didn't understand English, and they wouldn't eat the food offered to them. Bread, meat, fruit, everything was refused. They appeared weak, confused, but gentle. Eventually, someone brought them raw beans, still in their pods. The children devoured them, still uncertain, but clearly starving. Over the following days, they began to adjust. They learned enough English to communicate. The girl, who was slightly older, spoke first. She explained that they had come from a place known as St. Martin's Land, a place that existed in twilight where the sun never shone bright and everything glowed in shades of green. She said the people there were like them, green-skinned, and they lived underground, separated from the world above by a vast river. She claimed they had been herding their father's cattle when they heard a strange sound. They followed it into a cave, and after wandering in darkness, they emerged into the blinding daylight of Woolpit. But the boy, her younger brother, grew ill. He never fully recovered. He died soon after. The girl remained. Over time, her skin lost its green tint, fading into a more natural hue. She learned to live among the villagers. She was baptized, raised, and eventually married a man from King's Lynn, a town not far away. She lived a quiet life, it's said, but never forgot where she came from. Her memories of that twilight land remained, half dream, half memory. No one ever found the cave she described. No one ever discovered a river separating worlds. And no one else ever claimed to come from St. Martin's land. So the questions began. Who were these children? Why was their skin green? Was it illness? Malnutrition? Some have suggested they were Flemish refugees, children who had fled war and become lost. Their green skin, perhaps the result of anemia or a rare dietary deficiency. Their strange clothing, foreign. Their language, unfamiliar dialects misunderstood by English ears. But these explanations, while reasonable, do not sit easily with everyone. The records, written by monks and scribes, seem certain that the color of their skin was not natural, that they came from somewhere else, somewhere truly unknown. Others believe the story is a folk tale, shaped over time to teach a lesson about kindness to outsiders or the thin veil between worlds. But even if it is legend, it is a legend rooted in real places, real names, real people. And there is something about it that lingers. Not because it is loud, not because it is frightening, but because it is quiet, eerie, and tender. Two children, lost in the light, speaking of a land where everything is green. A place beneath the surface, unknown and unseen. Even now, Woolpit exists. A quiet English village with narrow roads and weathered stones. It looks like any other place. But in its fields, people still whisper about the children. Still wonder what truth may have lived beneath that story. Because sometimes, the most mysterious visitors do not arrive with fire or fanfare. They appear on a sunny afternoon, in silence. And they change everything. The more you sit with the story of the green children, the more it settles into your thoughts like a strange melody, quiet, haunting, and unforgettable. It is not a tale filled with drama or chaos. No monsters. No violence. Just two children, stepping out of the unknown and into the hands of a startled village. And then, just as gently, disappearing into the folds of history. Much of what we know, or think we know, comes from two sources, the writings of Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh. These men, both respected chroniclers of their time, lived in the 1200s. They recorded the story not as fantasy, but as truth. Strange truth, yes, but truth all the same. They described the girl's account with careful detail. The land of St. Martin's, where the sun never fully rose, where twilight lingered like a soft fog. A place without clear day or night. A glowing land of green, where everything, even the people, reflected that hue. The girl insisted it was real. Not a dream. Not a story. A place they had lived. A place they had loved. Many who revisit the tale ask a simple question: could such a place exist? Was it metaphor? Or memory? Was she speaking in symbols, describing something else entirely? There have been countless interpretations over the centuries. One of the most common suggests a physical explanation, that the children may have suffered from a condition known today as hypochromic anemia, sometimes called green sickness. A lack of iron that, in rare cases, can give the skin a pale greenish hue. If they had been starving, malnourished, and wandering for days, the color might have been exaggerated. And as they recovered, the hue would have faded, just as it did for the girl. The language barrier might also have been circumstantial. In that era, England was home to many groups speaking different dialects. Flemish, Saxon, Breton. The children may have been orphans, speaking a regional tongue misunderstood by the villagers of Woolpit. Their clothing, described as odd and unfamiliar, might simply have come from a different part of Europe. Strange to local eyes, but not otherworldly. Still, these explanations don't quite erase the wonder, or the peculiar details. Why the cave? Why the river? Why the twilight land? And what about the way they arrived? Found not on a road or in a neighboring town, but near a wolf pit just outside the village boundary. As if they had come from below. As if they had surfaced from a world beneath. Some folklorists believe the story is an echo of older myths. Tales of the Fae, of changelings, of children taken and returned, or of those who wandered into realms not meant for humans, then slipped back with strange memories and altered skin. There are stories like it scattered across cultures. In Irish mythology, children stumble into fairy circles and return changed. In Welsh tradition, glowing lands lie beneath hills, filled with music and golden light. Even in Greek legend, there are underworlds and shadowy domains that touch the edge of our home. Perhaps the Green Children were not entirely unique, but simply the best remembered. And then, there's the silence. After her marriage, the girl's life fades from record. Some believe she took a new name and lived quietly. Others say she never truly felt at home in the world of sunlight, that she always longed for the soft flow of the land she had lost. But there is no evidence of her death, no grave marked with her story. Only the tale remains, passed down, written, whispered. The village of Woolpit still remembers. Its signs mention the legend. Visitors come to stand near where the wolf pits once were, imagining two green-skinned children stepping from shadow into light, lost, confused, and entirely unknown. And in the hush of that countryside, if you listen closely, the story still breathes. It doesn't ask for belief. It doesn't offer proof. It simply lingers, as if waiting for someone to understand. In the quiet fields surrounding Woolpit, where crops sway gently in the wind and stone cottages stand unchanged by time, the story of the Green Children still lingers. It doesn't cry out. It doesn't demand attention. Instead, it hums beneath the soil like something rooted, an old truth or an old dream, softly echoing through the grass. Some believe the children were real, that they were refugees, survivors of war, orphaned by violence and driven underground, only to emerge in a land that didn't recognize them. Others believe they were the products of folklore, living metaphors for the foreign, the unknown, the outsider. And still, there are those who believe the tale is something older than either. They speak of thin places, locations where the boundary between worlds becomes soft and transparent. Places where you might slip between layers of reality like a breath moving through fog. Perhaps the children stepped through such a place. Perhaps, just once, a world beside ours opened for a moment, and then quietly closed again. The image of that girl, her skin fading from green to pale, her memories lingering even as her life moved forward, has become the heart of the story. She didn't disappear. She didn't die. She stayed, learned the language, lived among the villagers, married, became part of the world that once found her so strange. But did she ever forget? Did she ever stop seeing the green glow in her dreams? Did she ever stop hearing the soft hum of that underground land where the sun never fully rose? There's something beautifully sad about her story. Not because it ended in tragedy, but because it didn't. Because it became normal. Because the magic of her beginning was quietly folded into the ordinary rhythms of life. As if the mystery had to step back into silence to let the world continue turning. And so it did. Woolpit moved on. The wolf pits were filled. The houses grew older. Generations came and went. But the story remained. Tucked into history books, passed along in whispers, resurfacing every few decades when someone discovered it again, wide-eyed, curious, asking, did this really happen? No one knows. And maybe that's the point. The Green Children are not a puzzle to be solved. They are a reminder that wonder still lives on the edges. That mystery is not always violent or frightening. Sometimes it arrives gently, in the form of two children who do not speak your language, who do not share your colors, who bring with them a story no one else can verify. And that story becomes a thread woven into the tapestry of time, not for the sake of clarity, but for the sake of curiosity. That's what makes the tale so enduring. It doesn't force itself into belief. It simply invites you to imagine, to wonder what lies beneath our feet. To ask what might be waiting on the other side of a hill, or behind a stone wall, or inside the hush of a harvest field. Not everything in this world, or any world, needs to be explained. Some stories are meant to live in twilight, to shimmer just out of reach, to remind us that not every answer is necessary for a mystery to matter. And so the children remain, not in flesh, not in bone, but in memory, green-skinned, wide-eyed, holding hands in the sunlight for the first time. A brother who faded too quickly. A sister who stayed behind. And a village that never truly understood what had arrived on its doorstep that day. The past may never speak again, but it left behind a whisper. And tonight, as the wind brushes against your window and the world quiets around you, that whisper is still drifting. Soft, gentle, unexplained. In the foothills of Bedford County, Virginia, beneath rolling fields and aging trees, a legend has quietly lived for over a century. It speaks of buried treasure, gold, silver, and jewels hidden deep in the earth. But unlike most treasure tales, this one doesn't begin with a map. It begins with a mystery locked in code. The Beale Ciphers. 3 sheets of paper, filled with numbers. Rows and rows of what look like simple digits. No words, no letters, no symbols. But according to legend, these numbers contain a secret. A buried fortune worth millions. And so far, only one of the 3 pages has ever been solved. The story begins in the 1820s with a man named Thomas Jefferson Beale. Not to be confused with the president, though they shared the same name. Beale was a traveler, a hunter, and possibly an adventurer. He arrived at a quiet inn in Lynchburg, Virginia, around 1820, and stayed for several months. He kept mostly to himself, though he was always polite. One day, he handed a locked iron box to the innkeeper, a man named Robert Morris. Beale told him to guard it, and that one day, someone would return with the key, or instructions to open it. Then, he disappeared, and never came back. Years passed. Morris eventually opened the box, curious. Inside, he found 3 pages filled with numbers. Puzzled, he kept them for decades. Finally, in 1862, after long hesitation, he shared the contents with a friend whose identity remains unknown to this day. That friend became obsessed. He believed the pages were ciphers, secret messages written in numerical code. He began working tirelessly to break them. Years of effort passed with no success, until one breakthrough changed everything. He discovered that one of the pages, now known as cipher number 2, could be decoded using a key, the United States Declaration of Independence. By numbering the words of the Declaration and using each number in the cipher to refer to the first letter of a specific word, a message began to appear. Letter by letter, word by word, the code revealed a hidden confession. It stated that Thomas Beale had indeed buried treasure, $2 million worth, in gold and silver, carefully packed in iron pots and hidden in a vault 6 feet underground, somewhere in Bedford County. The message gave no exact location, but it claimed that the other 2 pages held everything else, the directions to find the treasure, and a list of the names of the men involved. Neither of those pages has ever been deciphered. People have tried. For over 100 years, cryptographers, treasure hunters, mathematicians, and dreamers have worked to unlock the remaining 2 codes. They've used historical documents, poems, algorithms, even the Bible, as possible keys. But the codes have held firm. They remain as stubborn as stone. Which leads to the question, was it ever real? Some believe the entire tale is a hoax. That the ciphers were created not to reveal treasure, but to spark interest, sell booklets, or simply to trick the curious. The first public version of the story appeared in a pamphlet published in 1885, written by the same unnamed friend who decoded cipher number 2. That pamphlet, now legendary, tells the entire Beale tale, adventure, treasure, mystery, and all. But skeptics point to the language, to the style, to the possibility that the ciphers were invented for the sake of legend, not truth. Still, others believe. Some claim to have found signs, marks in trees, symbols carved into rocks, old tools buried in the soil. Others speak of secret societies, of Masonic codes, or of Beale's connections to Western expeditions. The story keeps growing, layer by layer. And through it all, the 2 unsolved pages remain. 3 sheets of paper. 1 cracked. 2 unbroken. And somewhere, perhaps, a fortune waiting. When you look at the Beale ciphers, you don't see gold or silver. You see numbers. Endless rows of them, hundreds per page. Each digit a door locked without a key. Yet those who've tried to decode the mystery say it feels like something is just behind the surface. As if the truth is there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to see it. Cipher number 2, the only one solved, remains the foundation of the legend. It speaks plainly, once decoded. It claims that in the year 1819, Thomas Beale and a small group of companions discovered a vein of gold and silver while on a hunting trip in the American West, possibly in Colorado or New Mexico, though the exact location was never confirmed. They mined the metals, loaded them into wagons, and traveled over 1,000 miles east of Virginia. There, according to the cipher, they chose a quiet place in Bedford County and buried the treasure in a secure underground vault. Beale wrote that he returned twice more to add additional gold, silver, and precious jewels, increasing the value to over $2 million, an unimaginable fortune at the time. But the message was more than a treasure map. It was a letter of responsibility. Beale explained that he and his companions had no family nearby, no one who would know what happened if they disappeared. He feared they might die before returning. And so, he wrote the ciphers, 3 coded pages, one describing the treasure, one giving the names of those involved, and one detailing the exact location. All 3 were sealed and left with the innkeeper, along with a letter explaining that someone would come for them. No one ever did. The question that continues to haunt researchers is why only cipher number 2 has ever been solved. Why would Beale leave 3 coded pages but only provide the key to one? Some believe the other 2 ciphers use different documents as keys, perhaps other founding texts, such as the Constitution or the Federalist Papers. Others think Beale may have created his own key entirely, now lost to time. There is even a theory that all 3 messages were designed to be solved together, and that cracking one page without the others has left the code incomplete. The structure of the numbers has been studied in incredible depth. Experts in linguistics, cryptography, and mathematics have analyzed the patterns, frequencies, and repetitions. Some believe the other pages may contain hidden hints or layered codes. Others have noticed anomalies in the numbering itself, possible errors or deliberate traps meant to confuse anyone trying to solve the mystery without permission. Then there are those who think the entire cipher is a red herring, that it was never meant to be solved, that the legend of Thomas Beale was built not to reveal treasure, but to create wonder. In the late 1800s, shortly after the Beale pamphlet was published, people began flocking to Bedford County with shovels and hopes. They searched under trees, beside streams, in hillsides and barns. Some even tunneled into graveyards. The local community grew wary of the disturbance, but the search never truly ended. Even today, there are modern treasure hunters who believe the Beale gold is real. They walk the fields of Bedford County with ground-penetrating radar and digital maps. They trace old wagon paths. They scan the landscape with satellite images. They follow instinct, rumor, and the soft pull of the unknown. Because the Beale mystery isn't just about treasure. It's about the possibility of hidden things. That somewhere beneath your feet, history is sleeping. That someone, 200 years ago, left behind a secret too large to carry and too dangerous to speak aloud. And now, it's waiting. Wrapped in numbers. Guarded by silence. Buried not only in the ground, but in the folds of time. When the wind moves through Bedford County, it stirs the leaves softly, like the breath of a secret not quite spoken. It rustles through the trees, glides over old farm fields, and whispers across the land where some believe $2 million in buried treasure still sleeps beneath the soil. If it's there, it's waited a very long time. Over 2 centuries have passed since Thomas Beale is said to have hidden his fortune. And still, only one page of his mysterious ciphers has yielded its message. The other 2, one describing the treasure's exact location, the other listing the names of those who helped bury it, remain unreadable, uncracked, unclaimed. The men who originally chased the code were driven by more than gold. There was something romantic about it. A hidden vault. A traveler with a secret. A promise locked behind numbers. In many ways, the Beale ciphers are less about wealth and more about possibility. That perhaps, even in a quiet town, there might be something extraordinary buried beneath the surface. Modern cryptanalysts have approached the unsolved pages with everything from statistical analysis to machine learning. They've tested Caesar ciphers, Vigenère squares, and every common encryption technique from Beale's era. Some believe the numbers aren't actually a cipher at all, but a kind of false code. A diversion. Others hold fast to the idea that the solution lies in the right key. That Beale used another historical document, maybe a Bible or a book long since lost, to encode the remaining pages. The trouble is, without knowing the key, the code cannot be broken. Not truly. And so far, no key has worked. Even stranger theories have surfaced over time. Some believe Thomas Beale never existed at all. That the entire story was a piece of fiction, carefully constructed to sell booklets, spark imagination, or create a local legend. If that were true, then the treasure is nothing more than a myth, and the ciphers are elaborate nonsense. But that theory has its own gaps. There are no known hoaxes from the 1860s with that level of complexity. The ciphers aren't random. They follow real patterns. The solved page, using the Declaration of Independence as its key, works with precision. If the story was fabricated, it was done with care and intelligence. That's what keeps the mystery alive. It feels like it could be real. Like someone, somewhere, knew something they weren't supposed to say aloud, so they wrote it in numbers and buried the rest. The idea of a treasure hidden beneath a quiet piece of land is powerful. People don't just search for gold when they dig in Bedford County. They're searching for connection, for proof that the past is still out there, that it hasn't all been found or forgotten. There have been stories of near discoveries. People claiming they saw glints of metal, shapes beneath the dirt, old tools and fragments. But nothing confirmed, nothing that turned numbers into gold. And still, the search continues. You can find scanned images of the original ciphers online now. Hundreds of numbers printed in neat rows. On the surface, they see nothing. But when you stare at them long enough, you start to feel the itch of curiosity. You start to wonder if the answer is just behind your next thought. If the right book, the right line, the right number might unlock it all. That's the strange beauty of the Beale mystery. It keeps you reaching, not just for wealth, but for wonder. Because buried treasure doesn't always mean gold. Sometimes, it's the pursuit that matters more than the reward. The act of believing that secrets still exist, that the world hasn't told you everything yet. So as the wind slips across those fields in Virginia, you might imagine Beale himself, watching from some shadow of memory. Not laughing, not hiding, just waiting. For someone who can finish what he started. And until then, the numbers remain. Unbroken, unanswered, unmoved. In the early morning light of August 16th, 1942, the skies over San Francisco Bay were clear and quiet. The fog, a frequent visitor, had rolled out to sea. Sailors moved along the decks of ships. Families stirred in their homes. And above them, floating like a silver whale in the sky, came a blimp. It was a familiar sight. The United States Navy had launched dozens of blimps during World War II for patrol and surveillance. These massive airships, light and slow-moving, were used to search for enemy submarines along the Pacific coast. That morning, the blimp L-8 lifted off from Treasure Island with 2 men aboard, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Adams. The flight was routine. The mission, to patrol the coastline near San Francisco for signs of enemy submarines. L-8 was in perfect condition. The crew was experienced. The weather was calm. There was no reason to expect anything unusual. But within a few hours, something strange happened. Radio communication from the blimp was normal at first. At 7:38 in the morning, they reported leaving the base. At 7:52, they checked in again, still routine. Then, at around 8:50, a final message was received. They had spotted something suspicious in the water near the Farallon Islands and were going to investigate. And then, silence. No further transmissions. No distress calls. No warning. Nothing. The first to notice something was wrong were fishermen near the coast. They watched as the blimp slowly descended, much lower than usual. It drifted inland, its engines still humming, but its path wobbling strangely. It passed over the Golden Gate Bridge, dipping so low it nearly touched the rooftops. Then it scraped against a hill in Daly City, tearing part of its structure open. As it lost altitude, the blimp struck a utility pole, broke free, and came to rest in the middle of a suburban street. The soft hiss of escaping gas filled the air. Crowds gathered, and when Navy personnel finally reached the downed blimp, they made a chilling discovery. It was empty. Both crew members, Cody and Adams, had vanished. Their parachutes were still on board. Their life vests. Their headsets. Even a still-locked briefcase of classified materials. The blimp's engines were functioning. There were no signs of fire, damage, or foul play. The control cabin was undisturbed. The door had not been forced open, but there was no one inside. The press quickly dubbed it the Ghost Blimp. Search efforts began immediately. The coastline was combed. Divers scoured the waters near the last known location. Planes searched from the sky, but no trace of the men was ever found. No bodies. No wreckage. No clue. It was as if they had simply disappeared from the air. The Navy launched an investigation, and their findings raised more questions than answers. The crew had been in good spirits. The weather had remained steady. There was no reason for either man to leave the blimp, and certainly no reason for both to vanish without using safety equipment. Rumors quickly took root. Some suggested the men had jumped voluntarily, desertion, perhaps. But if so, why leave behind their gear? Why abandon a secure vessel mid-flight? Others speculated about enemy interference, that they had been captured by a Japanese submarine or hidden agent. But no evidence ever surfaced to support that theory. The most enduring mystery was not just the disappearance, it was the condition of the blimp itself. It had landed almost gently, as if guided by an invisible hand. Its engines had still been running. Its radio equipment had worked. The door had been latched. It was as if someone had stepped away for a moment and never returned. In the days after the Ghost Blimp came down, the public was gripped by a single question: where did the crew go? Newspapers ran headlines about the vanishing airmen. Radio shows whispered rumors. And while the Navy issued careful statements about ongoing investigations, there were no answers, only silence. The blimp itself, L8, became a strange sort of witness. It had landed in Daly City as if guided by invisible hands. Its gondola, where the crew had worked, showed no signs of violence or sudden chaos. The radio was working. The fuel was adequate. Even the door was secured. Nothing was missing except the men who had piloted it. The parachutes were still there. The life vests untouched. The emergency raft unused. If something had gone wrong, why had neither man used the equipment designed to save their lives? Some witnesses claimed to have seen the blimp behaving oddly before it came down, drifting low, turning in slow circles, as if it were confused. Others described it as eerily calm, as if on autopilot. But this was not a modern craft with automated flight systems. L8 required hands on the controls. It wasn't built to fly itself. The last radio message had come at 8:50 in the morning. They had spotted something in the water and were descending to investigate. And after that, no more contact. Just an empty blimp appearing over rooftops an hour later. What had they seen? One theory suggests that the crew may have spotted something they believed to be a submarine periscope. Perhaps in the rush to confirm, something went wrong, someone slipped, fell overboard. The other, attempting a rescue, followed. But even this theory raises questions. The gondola structure makes it difficult to fall from unintentionally. There are guardrails, harnesses, and tight quarters. And both men disappearing without alerting anyone seems unlikely. Then there were the weather conditions. The sky was clear. Winds were mild. There was no turbulence reported. In fact, the conditions were considered ideal for that morning's patrol. So what, then? Rumors grew darker. Some whispered that the men had been abducted, that they'd been taken from the blimp by an enemy vessel or something stranger. The idea of an unseen submarine lurking in the bay, surfacing briefly to seize two American airmen, captured imaginations. But again, there was no evidence. No foreign vessels reported. No distress signals. No sightings. Other theories pushed beyond the rational. Alien intervention. A time slip. Some even claimed the blimp had passed through a brief tear in the sky, and the crew had simply vanished. But even among the wildest theories, there remained one truth that was hard to deny. No trace of the men was ever found. Not in the water. Not on land. No clothing. No bodies. No debris. Just absence. The Navy eventually closed the investigation. The official report listed the cause as unknown. No evidence of sabotage. No signs of equipment failure. No credible explanation. Both men, Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams, were declared dead. Their families received condolences, but no closure. The blimp, L8, was quietly repaired and returned to service. It flew again, this time with a different crew. It continued its patrols through the end of the war. The skies over California returned to normal, but the ghost of that quiet morning lingered. People continued to talk, and the story, like the blimp itself, drifted gently into legend. Time moved on, as it always does. The war ended. The skies grew quieter, and the mystery of the Ghost Blimp faded from front-page headlines to whispered retellings. But for those who remembered it, the image remained, a silver airship drifting silently over the city, its engines humming, its gondola empty. L8 was eventually retired from military service. Its frame, repurposed for promotional use, continued to appear at public events under a new name. But those who knew its past, who remembered what it once carried and what it returned without, looked at it differently. Not as a machine, but as a question suspended in the air. The disappearance of Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams was never explained. Their official fates remain recorded, but the truth of what happened on that August morning in 1942 is still unknown. Some say it was simply a tragic accident, one man falling, the other attempting to save him, neither able to return. Others say something stranger occurred, something that defied protocol, gravity, and logic. Over the years, amateur sleuths revisited the case. They combed through archived weather reports, radio logs, flight plans. They interviewed remaining witnesses, studied diagrams of the blimp, and reanalyzed timelines. But the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. The blimp itself hadn't malfunctioned. The mission hadn't gone beyond routine. Everything pointed to normal until it didn't. That's what makes the Ghost Blimp story so haunting. There was no explosion, no storm, no enemy engagement. Just two men, trusted and trained, who vanished from a fully functional aircraft without a sound. It is the quiet that makes it eerie. Because we expect noise and catastrophe, cries, flashes, warnings. But this mystery was made of silence. A blimp floating as if nothing was wrong. A radio that stayed quiet. A door that remained closed. The questions left behind were simple, yet impossible. Why would both men leave their posts? Why would they abandon a secure flight without calling for help? Why would they leave behind their parachutes, their life vests, and a locked case of classified materials? And if something forced them out, how? Some believe we'll never know. That the answer lies somewhere at the bottom of the bay, or in memories now lost to time. That the ocean kept its secret that day, as it often does. But still, there's something in the stillness of it all that feels unfinished. The blimp didn't crash. It descended slowly, deliberately, until it brushed the ground. It didn't burst or scatter debris. It didn't scream. It simply came down, soft as a sigh, onto a quiet street. Its message was not a cry for help, but an empty seat. And that silence has lasted for over 80 years. Perhaps, in the end, that's what gives the story its power. Not the possibility of enemies, not the shadow of sabotage, but the simple idea that sometimes people disappear and the world offers no explanation. Sometimes, all that remains is the echo of a flight that should have ended with a handshake in the landing and instead ended with a question. The skies above San Francisco are busy now. Planes cross overhead. Satellites float far beyond. The old hangars of Treasure Island have been repurposed. Few remember the day the blimp came home without its crew. But if you were to walk that same street in Daly City, where L8 finally rested, soft metal torn, gas still hissing, you might still feel it. That hush. That pause. The feeling that something was missing. Not just two men, but the answer. And somewhere, high above, the sky still carries the question. It was just after 6:30 in the morning, on the first day of December, 1948. The beach near Somerton, a quiet suburb of Adelaide, Australia, was peaceful. Waves rolled in with a gentle hush. The sun cast long golden shadows across the sand. And there, propped against the seawall, sat a man. At first, he seemed to be sleeping. He was well dressed in a press suit and polished shoes. His legs were stretched out, his head tilted gently to one side. He looked like a businessman who had drifted off while watching the ocean. But as the morning wore on, and he didn't move, passers-by began to grow uneasy. Eventually, someone called the police. When they arrived, the officers found that the man was not sleeping. He was dead, but there were no signs of trauma. No blood, no wounds, nothing to suggest how he had died. And the stranger details were just beginning. He carried no wallet, no identification, no name tag. All the labels had been carefully cut out of his clothing. His suitcase, discovered later at a nearby train station, was filled with neatly folded items, also missing all brand names and markings. The man had been deliberately anonymized, erased. The autopsy deepened the mystery. His internal organs were congested, his stomach full of blood, consistent with poisoning. But no poison was found. Not in his body. Not on his clothes. The coroner wrote, "Death by unknown cause." And so, the man became known as the Somerton Man. The case might have remained a curious footnote in the city's history if not for what was found next. Hidden in a small pocket of his trousers was a rolled-up piece of paper. Just a scrap. But on it, two printed words, Taman Shud. The phrase was quickly traced to a book, an old volume of Persian poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The words meant ended or finished. A poetic way to say the end. A strange thing to carry in your pocket on the day you die. Even stranger, a local man came forward days later. He had found a copy of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back seat of his car, which had been parked near the beach the night the Somerton man died. In that book, a section had been torn out, the very part containing the words Taman Shud. This was the source. But inside the book was something else. Scrawled faintly on the back page was a series of letters, seemingly random. A code. Alongside it, a local phone number. The number belonged to a woman living just blocks from the beach. She said she didn't know the man, though she seemed visibly shaken when shown his face. And the code. It has never been solved. The letters scribbled in the back of the Rubaiyat were uneven and faint, as if written in haste or secrecy. They formed no recognizable words. Just lines of seemingly random characters, with breaks between clusters. Some believe the pattern suggested an encrypted message, perhaps a substitution cipher or shorthand. But despite decades of analysis, no one has ever been able to read it. And the woman whose number was written nearby. Her name was Jessica Thompson, though she often went by the name Joe. She was a nurse, quiet, respected, and living just a short walk from where the Somerton man had been found. When the police interviewed her, she denied knowing the man. But when shown a plaster cast of his face, his body had already been buried. She was reported to have reacted strangely. Pale, startled, close to fainting. Still, she insisted she had no idea who he was. Her copy of the Rubaiyat, she claimed, had gone missing some time before. But she offered no clear reason why her number would be in the man's book, or how it had ended up in the back seat of a stranger's car. The connection was delicate, like a thread pulled too tight to follow without breaking. Joe had once given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man named Alf Boxall, an army officer she had known during the war. For a time, investigators thought Boxall might be the dead man. But when they found him alive, living quietly with his own copy of the book, complete and untorn, the lead collapsed. Still, the parallels were eerie. Two men, the same book, two women connected to both. And one message, Taman Shud. The end. The case refused to rest. The Somerton man had no dental records that matched. No fingerprints in any database. His ears were a unique shape, unusually formed. His calves were unusually developed, suggesting years of physical activity, possibly ballet or long-distance running. His hands, rough but clean, offered no clear profession. Every piece of him suggested a life of effort, but nothing left behind. He became more myth than man. Over time, theories flourished. Some believed he was a spy, perhaps involved in Cold War operations, killed by an untraceable poison. The lack of identification, the code, the foreign book, the sudden death, all of it seemed too orchestrated, too careful for coincidence. Others believed he had taken his own life, perhaps in heartbreak, perhaps over something we'll never know. The poetry, the message in his pocket, the peaceful position of his body. It all suggested intention, but no one could say for certain. The body was buried in a local cemetery, beneath a headstone that read simply, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." A grave without a name, a story without a final chapter. And yet, it lingered. Each year, new investigators came forward. Cryptographers, historians, writers. They examined the photos, the autopsy reports, the book, the handwriting. They redrew the timeline, rechecked the train tickets and the suitcase and the silent face of the man who had left nothing behind but questions. What was he running from? Why Somerton Beach? Why the Rubaiyat? And what did the words Taman Shud mean to him? The beach has changed over time. New buildings have risen. The seawall has been reinforced. But the place where he was found still feels quiet, even now. A patch of sand where the wind moves low and slow. A place where the tide erases footprints, but not stories. This Somerton man had no voice to explain himself. So we keep asking. And the silence, for decades, has answered only with mystery. Years passed, and the Somerton man remained where mystery had left him, buried beneath a quiet marker, with no name, no past, and no one to claim him. But the questions surrounding his death never settled. They shifted like the ocean breeze, returning again and again to that stretch of sand where everything began. Each new decade brought fresh curiosity. Investigators re-examined the case, armed with new tools, new technologies, and new theories. The scrap of paper in his pocket, Taman Shud, was tested for typeface and ink. The coded message in the back of the book was digitized and analyzed. The suitcase and its contents were photographed, cataloged, studied. But the man himself remained silent. His story became something between folklore and cold case. School children in Adelaide grew up hearing whispers of the Somerton Man. Tourists visited his grave. Documentaries were filmed, books published, theories expanded. Some were grounded in logic. Others drifted into speculation. Spy networks, secret affairs, lost identities. One persistent theory centered around Jessica Thompson, the woman whose number had been found in the book. She had gone on to live a private life, rarely speaking of the case. When she passed away, some believed the secret had died with her. Others looked to her son, whose striking resemblance to the Somerton Man sparked rumors that perhaps the man on the beach was more than a stranger. But nothing could be proven. And then, after more than 70 years, the ground shifted again, this time literally. In 2021, the Somerton Man's body was exhumed under the direction of South Australian authorities. Advances in forensic science, especially in genetic genealogy, had offered new hope. By examining the man's DNA and comparing it to public ancestry databases, researchers hoped to build a family tree, one leaf at a time. It was delicate work. The remains had rested in the soil for decades. But even fragile samples can whisper secrets. In 2022, the breakthrough came. A professor of electrical engineering and digital forensics, Derek Abbott, working alongside American genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, announced a potential identification. Through meticulous genetic mapping and historical research, they believed the Somerton Man was Carl Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne. Webb had left little behind. No public records of a clear disappearance. No known grave. But the genetic evidence aligned. The facial structure. The timeline. Even the personal quirks. Suddenly, the man once believed to be a spy, a drifter, a lost lover, had a name, a birth date, a possible story. But even this answer raised more questions. Why had Carl Webb left Melbourne? What brought him to Adelaide? What was he doing on Somerton Beach? Did he know Jessica Thompson, or was it coincidence? And how did he die, with no visible wounds, no trace of poison, no clear cause? The identification provided roots, but not resolution. Because even with a name, the mystery remained intact. Sometimes, the strangest part of a mystery is how it lingers. Not loudly, but quietly. Like a song that plays too softly to hear clearly, but just loud enough that you never forget it's there. The Somerton Man, now perhaps Carl Webb, had become more than an individual. He had become a symbol of the unknown. A reminder that even in a world of records and databases, some stories slip through the cracks. But now, he is not entirely alone. He has a name again. He has a story, however incomplete. And for the first time in decades, the winds at Somerton Beach no longer carry only silence. They carry the echo of footsteps, of questions, of a man who once sat quietly against a seawall, watching the horizon, holding a secret. He may never speak again. But his story, now, has a voice. And somewhere in the hush between waves, it still asks the most human question of all. Who are we when the world forgets our name? In the high desert of northern New Mexico, surrounded by mesas, sagebrush, and distant peaks, there lies a small town called Taos. It's a quiet place, known for its art, its ancient adobe buildings, and the soft glow of sunset over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. But for some, Taos is remembered for something else, something they can't see, but can't escape. A sound. A hum. It began in the early 1990s, though some claim to have heard it long before. A low, persistent noise, soft like a distant engine, but constant, never fading. It seemed to have no source, no direction. It wasn't carried on the wind. It didn't stop with earplugs. It was simply there. Not everyone could hear it. In fact, most couldn't. But for those who could, the experience was impossible to ignore. The hum wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp or piercing. It didn't roar. Instead, it lived in the background, like the rumble of a truck idling far away. But no truck ever came. No plane ever passed. The sound was always just out of reach, too low to pinpoint, too real to forget. For some, it was a mild annoyance. For others, it became unbearable. People described headaches, sleepless nights, a constant pressure in their skulls. Some said it vibrated in their chests. Others felt it beneath their feet as if the earth itself was humming. And no one, not scientists, doctors, or engineers, could find where it was coming from. The town of Taos took it seriously. A survey conducted in 1993 found that around 2% of the population reported hearing the hum. That may seem like a small number, but in a town of just a few thousand people, it was enough to stir concern. The government sent investigators. Researchers arrived with sensitive microphones, vibration detectors, and frequency analyzers. They measured power lines, monitored natural gas lines, checked for distant factories or hidden military signals. But they found nothing. The hum didn't show up on their equipment. It didn't register as sound. And yet, people still heard it. The mystery deepened. Some theorized the hum was a form of low-frequency sound known as infrasound, vibrations just below the range of human hearing, but still able to affect the body. Infrasound has been known to cause unease, anxiety, and even hallucinations in some environments. Perhaps, they thought, a geological feature or unknown machine was generating infrasound across the valley. But no consistent source was found. Others turned to technology. Could it be electromagnetic interference? A hidden radar station? A secret communications tower? No evidence supported that either. And so, theories spread like sound waves through air, quiet, invisible, but persistent. Was it a form of mass hysteria? A shared delusion? Or something real but misunderstood? And most haunting of all, if it was real, why could only some people hear it? The people who could hear the hum, often called hearers, came from all walks of life. Artists, teachers, retirees, builders. Their experiences were eerily consistent. A droning sound, a sensation of vibration, a presence that followed them not only through town, but sometimes into the countryside, their cars, even their homes. They spoke of it with quiet frustration, often careful not to sound paranoid. But the toll it took was real. Some described it as a low thrum, like a diesel engine running in the distance. Others said it wasn't a sound at all, but a feeling, like pressure against the ears, a humming tension that never went away. It was worse at night, when the rest of the world quieted down. And while most people slept in peace, the hearers laid awake, listening to something no one else could confirm. Some moved away. Others tried to block it out, white noise machines, heavy drapes, insulation, but the hum always found its way through. A few took comfort in community, gathering to compare symptoms, patterns, and theories. They weren't alone. That helped, but it didn't explain anything. Scientists studying the phenomenon had few answers. Theories continued to stack, each one with just enough plausibility to survive, but never enough to solve the puzzle. One idea pointed to industrial origins, distant mining operations, electric substations, gas pipelines. Yet the hum was reported even where those things didn't exist, and no recording equipment ever captured it in any consistent way. Another theory suggested otoacoustic emissions, sounds produced internally by the human ear. In some cases, people generate faint tones from within their own auditory systems, like a biological echo chamber. Perhaps the hearers weren't picking up a noise at all. Perhaps they were creating it. But that didn't explain why so many people in one place would start hearing the same thing around the same time. Still others turned to more abstract causes, energy grids, underground tremors, changes in magnetic fields. The earth itself humming beneath the soles of our feet. Some believed it might be a byproduct of military or communications experiments. Something not meant to be heard, but heard nonetheless by those with unusually sensitive perception. And then, of course, came the stranger possibilities. That the hum was not mechanical, but intentional. A signal, a broadcast, a kind of low-frequency message from somewhere or something that had yet to be identified. People pointed out that hum reports weren't limited to Taos. Similar sounds had been described in Bristol, England, Kokomo, Indiana, Windsor, Ontario, all with slightly different characteristics, all equally mysterious. But Taos remained the most famous, because here, the sound was not just occasional. It lingered, year after year, and it left no physical evidence behind. Just stories, soft-spoken, steady, and unresolved. The kind of mystery that lives not in evidence, but in experience. For those who lived with the hum, it became a constant companion, an invisible thread stitched into the fabric of daily life. You couldn't point to it. You couldn't escape it. You could only feel it. haunting presence that moved with you just beneath the surface of sound, like a second heartbeat belonging to something unseen. Most people never heard it. They went about their lives unaware that, to others, the air itself carried a quiet pressure. That silence was not really silent. That stillness was not still. The town of Taos, beautiful and remote, remained the perfect setting for the mystery. Its vast skies and empty stretches of desert made the hum feel even more unnatural. How could a place so open and quiet be filled with something so persistent? Some described walking out into the desert just to be free of it, only to find that it followed them, like an echo with no source. Psychologists studied the phenomenon from another angle. Could it be psychosomatic? A case of expectation-breeding experience? Once someone learned about the hum, would they start to hear it too, simply because they believed it was there? But this theory didn't explain why the symptoms were so specific. Why some people, even before hearing about the hum, reported the exact same sensations. Nor did it explain the way some people suddenly stopped hearing it when they moved away, only to hear it again the moment they returned. And so, the Taos Hum became something more than sound. It became a symbol of how the world still holds pieces that don't fit neatly into science. Of how perception, real or imagined, can shape a person's entire experience of reality. And of how some mysteries aren't solved. They're simply carried. To this day, there is no confirmed source for the hum. No definitive answer. It hasn't been captured reliably on recording equipment. It hasn't been traced to a transmitter. It hasn't been duplicated in a lab. It simply exists, or doesn't, depending on who you ask. Some who once heard it say it faded over time, as mysteriously as it began. Others still hear it now, decades later, humming faintly behind everyday life. For those people, it's not a question of proof. It's a presence, as real as breath, as personal as a shadow. And perhaps that's the heart of it. The Taos Hum reminds us that not everything needs to be solved to be true. That sometimes the world offers us questions without blueprints, sounds without sources, and experiences that linger just beyond the edge of understanding. So tonight, as you listen to the silence around you, let your ears stretch a little further. Not to prove or disprove, not to solve, just to listen. Because sometimes the quietest mysteries hum the loudest. It was a warm day in July, 1954. The setting was Tokyo International Airport, bustling, efficient, orderly. Passengers stepped off planes into the humid air, carrying luggage, passports, and the usual wariness of long travel. Customs officers moved through their routines with practiced ease. And then came a man who would quietly shake the edges of reality. He was well-dressed, calm, polite. He spoke fluent French, Japanese, and several other languages. In nearly every way, he appeared to be a normal businessman. The kind you might sit beside on a plane and forget a moment later. He handed over his passport, expecting the same simple process he'd likely gone through countless times before. But that's where everything stopped. The passport was from a country no one had ever heard of. The document said it was issued by the nation of Taured, a place that did not exist on any map. The passport looked real. The stamps were valid, and several showed past visits to Japan, as well as other countries in Europe and the Middle East. The officers assumed it was a mistake. A forgery, maybe. But the man didn't seem confused. Quite the opposite. When they asked where his country was, he pointed confidently to a spot on the map. It was nestled between France and Spain, right where the tiny principality of Andorra sits. But he insisted Andorra didn't exist. His country, Taured, had existed for over 1,000 years. The customs officials were baffled. They showed him current maps, trying to explain. But the man grew frustrated. He said he'd never heard of Andorra. That Taured had always been there. That it was his homeland. His papers were consistent. His demeanor, rational. There was no sign of deception. He believed what he was saying. And that's what made it so unsettling. Still unsure of what to make of him, the authorities escorted the man to a hotel nearby. They instructed him to stay the night while the issue was investigated. 2 immigration officers were stationed outside his door to ensure he didn't leave. The next morning, they opened the room to find it empty. The man was gone. The door hadn't been opened. The windows were locked and far too high to jump. There was no ledge, no fire escape. His belongings had vanished too. Every trace of him, passport, documents, hotel record, disappeared like mist. The officers were stunned. They searched every possible escape route, questioned hotel staff, checked security footage, but it was as if the man had simply ceased to exist, slipped between the cracks of reality and vanished. No record of him was ever found again. News of the encounter spread quietly at first, passed between officials, whispered in corners. Over the years, it became one of the most intriguing modern legends. The story of the man from nowhere, a traveler with a passport from a phantom country. Skeptics have dismissed the account as an urban myth, a distortion of fact. They argue that the story may have originated from a misinterpretation of documents, or perhaps a mentally unstable traveler with a fabricated identity. Some point to language barriers, translation errors, a bureaucratic tangle that grew into folklore. But the strange consistency of the tale makes it difficult to dismiss entirely. Multiple reports cite the same details: the passport from Taured, the confident placement on the map, the vanishing act from a sealed room. There are no known official records, no confirmed photos. But that's what gives the story its chilling power. Because we live in a world governed by borders and maps, by data and identity. And this story suggests that, perhaps, all of that is more fragile than we think. That maybe, once in a while, someone steps through. From somewhere close. But not quite here. And maybe, they don't always find their way back. What made the man from Taured so memorable wasn't just the passport or his strange knowledge of geography, it was how normal he seemed. That's what lingered in the minds of those who heard the story. He didn't appear lost, confused, or frantic. He was calm, methodical, a businessman with an itinerary, an appointment in Tokyo, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from traveling frequently. And yet, every answer he gave led deeper into the unknown. He explained that he had visited Japan several times before, on business. He named the company he worked for, the Japanese clients he planned to meet, even the name of the hotel where he had booked his stay. But when officials followed up on his claims, each one unraveled. The company he claimed to work for didn't exist. The hotel had no reservation under his name. The clients he named had never heard of him. Still, he remained composed, surprised, but not panicked. He showed stamps from previous visits to Japan in his passport. Visas from several countries across Europe. Customs officials who inspected the document reported it as a genuine passport, with no signs of tampering or forgery. The cover was worn, the pages creased from use, the ink consistent. And the strangest part, the stamps matched airports and border crossings from around the world, places that did exist. Everything about the man pointed to reality, except for his origin. The theory of parallel dimensions often enters the conversation here. The idea that this man came from a world similar to ours, nearly identical, in fact, but not exactly the same. In his world, perhaps Taured had replaced Endor on the map. Maybe in his version of history, the country had been established long ago and survived into the modern age. And through some unknown slip, some tiny fracture between realities, he ended up here. It's the kind of theory that science can't quite prove, but also can't completely dismiss. In quantum physics, there are serious discussions about the multiverse, the possibility that our universe is just one of many, each with slightly different timelines, outcomes, and realities. Perhaps the man from Taured was an accident, a traveler caught between layers of existence. And for a brief moment, he found himself in the wrong version of Earth. Those who lean toward this explanation often cite his reactions. The fact that he didn't seem insane or dishonest, that he fully believed in the reality he came from. If it were a hoax, they argue, why go through such elaborate detail? Why vanish, leaving no trace, when so many eyes were watching? But skeptics offer simpler explanations. They suggest he may have been a smuggler using forged documents, that the story grew over time, changing slightly with each retelling. Others believe it was a case of misidentification, an error in paperwork that spiraled into legend. And yet, this story doesn't feel like a forgery. It doesn't shout or demand belief. It whispers. It settles in gently, like a shadow at the edge of a doorway, just enough to make you pause. Even if the man never existed, even if the event was an elaborate misunderstanding, the story lives because it taps into something deeper. The fragility of what we consider real. The idea that identity is, in many ways, a set of agreed-upon labels: name, birthplace, citizenship, a passport, a driver's license, a database entry. But what if one piece doesn't match? What if a single word, like Taured, slips past the filter of what's known? What happens when the system can't explain you? For the officials at Tokyo Airport, that was the dilemma. Here was a man who didn't belong on any map, but stood before them nonetheless. Not a ghost, not a figment. A person, breathing, speaking, waiting. And then, gone. If he was lost, he never asked for help. If he was confused, he never showed it. And if he knew something he wasn't supposed to, he never said a word. He simply vanished, leaving behind a hole not just in a hotel room, but in our understanding of how the world works. In the end, the story of the man from Taured is not about proof. It's about presence. A man who appeared in a place he wasn't supposed to exist, holding documents no one could verify, and a belief in a home no one could find. There is no confirmed name, no grainy photograph, no surviving passport. But the weight of the tale lies not in evidence, but in the unease it leaves behind. Because once you hear it, you begin to look at the world differently. You start to wonder how tightly stitched our version of reality really is. How much of it depends on mutual agreement, on the maps we draw, the nations we name, the histories we remember, and what happens when one thread pulls loose. Perhaps it was just a bureaucratic fluke, a stranger whose background didn't line up due to forged papers or misunderstood intentions. Perhaps the details were exaggerated over time, as stories often are. A little confusion, a strange coincidence, and the rest filled in by human imagination. But still, the core of the mystery remains untouched. The man who pointed to a country that didn't exist, with the certainty of someone who had lived there. The passport that looked genuine, but belonged to a ghost nation. The man who disappeared from a guarded room, as if he had never been there at all. If it was a hoax, no one ever claimed responsibility. If it was a mistake, no one ever cleared it up. And if it was something else, something stranger, it left no trail behind. That's what gives the story its power. It doesn't try to explain itself. It simply happened. And in doing so, it created a crack in the surface of what we assume is true. A small ripple in the compound of reality, spreading quietly outward. Some have drawn comparisons to other mysterious travelers, people who show up with no past, no record, speaking languages no one can identify. Stories like these appear in scattered headlines, police reports, even folklore. Often dismissed, occasionally investigated, but always unresolved. They are anomalies, blips, but they remind us that even in a world filled with cameras, satellites, and databases, people can still fall through the cracks, or climb out of them. Because the world is big, and what we know about it, while vast, is not complete. We live our lives on the surface of a planet that we mostly understand, following maps we've drawn ourselves, trusting the names and places we've agreed upon. But every so often, something arrives that doesn't fit. A sound no one else can hear. A book no one can read. A person from a place that can't be found. And when those things appear, they don't always explain themselves. They don't leave instructions or answers. They just leave a question. What if reality isn't as solid as we think? What if, just beyond the reach of our senses, there are other versions, other maps, other histories, other names? Maybe Taured exists somewhere else. And maybe, for a moment, that man stepped through. On purpose or by accident. With knowledge or without. And when the door closed behind him, he simply vanished. But the echo of his arrival remains. Soft as a breath. Sharp as a crease in a passport. Unresolved. It began with grief. In May of 1957, in the quiet English town of Hexham, tragedy struck the Pollock family. Two young sisters, Joanna and Jacqueline, were walking to church when a car struck and killed them both. Joanna was 11 years old. Jacqueline was 6. Their parents, John and Florence Pollock, were devastated, shattered in the way only a parent can be when the world takes their children without warning. But the story doesn't end in sorrow. In fact, that's where it begins. A year later, Florence became pregnant again. John, despite his grief, was certain, unshakably certain, that they would have twins. He also believed something even more peculiar, that the twins would be Joanna and Jacqueline, returned to them. Florence didn't share his conviction. At least, not at first. She was skeptical, unsettled by John's belief in reincarnation. But on October 4th, 1958, she gave birth to twin girls, Jillian and Jennifer. They were identical in many ways, but not entirely. Jennifer, the younger by 10 minutes, had a distinctive birthmark on her forehead and another across her waist. These matched the marks that had once belonged to Jacqueline. John saw this as a sign. So did others. As the twins grew older, the similarities between them and their deceased sisters deepened in ways that no one could quite explain. Despite never having met Joanna or Jacqueline, the twins began to ask for toys that had belonged to them, by name. They spoke of places they had never visited, people they had never met. They described moments from lives they had not lived. One day, while walking past a schoolyard, the girls pointed to it and said, "That's where we used to play." They'd never been there before. Another time, Florence caught them role-playing a game in which Jennifer lay on the ground, her head in Jillian's lap. Jennifer told her sister, "There's blood coming out of my eyes. That's where the car hit me." No one had ever told them how the accident happened. And it wasn't just speech. The twins had behaviors that mirrored their sisters. Jillian moved and spoke like Joanna. Jennifer acted like Jacqueline, mirroring her temperament, her gestures, even the way she held a pencil. Their parents were unnerved, but also comforted, haunted by echoes of the past and the voices of the present. Then came the memories. The twins recalled their old house, the one their family had moved out of before they were born. When taken there, they recognized it immediately. They named rooms correctly, pointed out where things had once been, where toys were kept, where certain events had happened. None of it made sense. Florence, the more cautious of the two parents, began to waver. The evidence was not just emotional, it was specific, detailed, the kind of thing that children could not simply guess or invent. She began to wonder if her husband had been right all along. But just as suddenly as the memories began, they started to fade. Around the age of 7, the twins seemed to lose all recollection of their previous lives. They no longer spoke of Joanna or Jacqueline. The odd knowledge, the eerily accurate memories, it all faded like a dream upon waking. And in their place remained two ordinary girls, growing up in a quiet town. But the question lingered. Had something extraordinary passed through the Pollock family? Something beyond grief, beyond coincidence, beyond science? Or had the parents, desperate for comfort, seen patterns that weren't really there? To some, the story is a rare and compelling case of reincarnation, a glimpse into a mystery as old as time. To others, it is a story of projection, trauma, and the desperate longing to make sense of loss. And yet, the girls were never coached. The details they offered were never prompted. And the memories they carried, briefly but vividly, were never taught. They simply remembered. As the Pollock twins grew, so did the mystery around them. Neighbors whispered. Journalists asked questions. Psychologists took notes. But through it all, Jillian and Jennifer seemed unaware that their lives were under a microscope. To them, the memories they carried were not strange, not magical, not frightening. They were simply there. And that was part of what made it so unsettling. They spoke about Joanna and Jacqueline in the first person, not as stories they'd been told, but as events they had lived. When asked how they knew certain things, they would shrug. They just did. There was no struggle, no confusion. The knowledge came effortlessly, like remembering the way back home. One day, Florence found the girls digging in the garden. When asked what they were doing, they replied, "We're looking for the toys we buried." The parents watched in stunned silence as the girls uncovered a box of old playthings that had indeed once belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline, buried years earlier and long forgotten. There were too many of these moments to ignore. They accumulated like quiet footsteps, each one leading deeper into the unknown. And then there were the fears. Jennifer had a recurring fear of cars. Loud, fast-moving vehicles made her visibly anxious. Once, when a car engine started unexpectedly near her, she screamed and clung to her sister, sobbing uncontrollably. When asked what was wrong, she said, "The car is coming to get us." Neither twin had ever been in a serious accident. But the fear ran deep. John Pollock, the father, believed with unwavering conviction that his daughters were the reincarnation of the ones he had lost. He was not shy about this belief. To him, the birthmarks, the shared behaviors, the unexplainable memories, it all formed a pattern too strong to dismiss. Florence, more reserved and cautious, didn't speak about it as often. But even she admitted that something unusual was happening. Something that could not be explained away by logic alone. Eventually, the story caught the attention of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a respected psychiatrist from the University of Virginia. He had spent years documenting cases of children who claimed to recall past lives, particularly in cultures where reincarnation was more widely accepted. But the Pollock case stood out. It was happening in post-war England, among a Christian family with no cultural expectation of reincarnation. Dr. Stevenson traveled to Hexham and interviewed the family extensively. He documented the girls' behaviors, their memories, and the timeline of events. He found no signs of manipulation or deceit. The twins had not been pressured or coached. The knowledge they demonstrated came from somewhere untraceable. His conclusion: he considered it one of the strongest cases of reincarnation he had ever studied. And yet, even he admitted there were no definitive answers. Science, after all, is not built for ghosts. As the twins approached their 8th birthdays, the strange memories began to slip away. The girls stopped mentioning Joanna and Jacqueline. The odd habits faded. Their preferences changed. They grew into their own identities, no longer mirroring the sisters who had come before them. It was as if a door had quietly closed. John and Florence never pushed the matter. They allowed the twins to live normal lives. The past was not forgotten, but it was no longer center stage. Still, the story never fully disappeared. It traveled through books, journals, and television segments. It found its way into discussions on consciousness, memory, and the nature of the soul. Not because it offered easy answers, but because it didn't. And that is where its power lies. In the not knowing. In the possibility. The Pollock twins are now adults. They live quiet lives, far removed from the swirl of questions that once surrounded them. When asked about their early memories, they acknowledged that something strange happened. That, for a while, they remembered things they shouldn't have. But the memories feel distant now, soft around the edges, like dreams after waking. Familiar, but fading. The Pollock twins eventually moved past the shadow of the sisters who came before them. As they entered adulthood, Jillian and Jennifer became individuals, no longer reflections of Joanna and Jacqueline. The unusual memories that once surfaced so vividly faded completely. They stopped speaking of the past as if it were theirs. They stopped asking about old toys, old rooms, old lives. But those early years never stopped echoing. For John and Florence, the story remained alive. Their family had experienced something no amount of rational thinking could fully explain. They never sought fame. They never tried to sell their story. They simply lived with it, quietly, gratefully, confused but comforted. Their grief had found a strange kind of resolution, not in closure, but in mystery. John always believed. Until the end of his life, he remained firm in his conviction that his twin daughters were the return of the two he lost. Not in a poetic way, not metaphorically. Literally. Reincarnation in its most unambiguous form. He saw it not as faith, but as fact. Florence became more accepting over time. While she never matched John's unwavering belief, she came to acknowledge that the coincidences were too many, too precise, to ignore completely. And when strangers asked her about the girls' past lives, she didn't claim to have answers. But she also didn't dismiss the questions. Dr. Ian Stevenson, the psychiatrist who studied their case, included it in his published works on reincarnation. He documented every detail meticulously: birthmarks, behaviors, statements, fears. He made no wild claims. But he concluded that the case deserved serious attention. It stood among the strongest he had seen in the Western world, and perhaps anywhere. What makes the Pollock twins so fascinating, even decades later, is how ordinary the story feels on the surface. A quiet town, a grieving family, 2 children growing up in a modest home. There's no mysticism, no rituals, no incense or seances. Just little girls who remembered things they were never told. That's what makes the story hard to shake. It's not loud. It's quiet. The kind of mystery that unfolds in the hush of everyday life. And maybe that's why it matters. Because mysteries don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they arrive as whispers, 2 sisters standing in a garden, unearthing toys they never buried, calling them by name. Skeptics, of course, offer explanations. Some believe the parents, especially John, projected their grief onto the twins, subtly influencing their behavior. That the girls, even unknowingly, absorbed stories and suggestions, and then mirrored them back. Others argue that shared family dynamics, unconscious cues, and environmental reinforcement created an illusion of reincarnation. And perhaps, in part, they're right. Memory is fragile. Perception is flawed. Human beings are storytelling creatures, constantly stitching meaning into the gaps of what we don't understand. But even the most skeptical voice must pause at the details. The accuracy, the birthmarks, the specific behaviors. How do we measure the weight of coincidence? How many strange alignments does it take before doubt begins to bend? There are no tests for this kind of mystery. No instruments to measure the soul. No formulas for what lingers between one life and the next. And maybe that's the point. The Pollitt twins remind us that there are places science hasn't reached, not because it's wrong, but because some corners of the human experience refuse to be charted. Maybe what matters most isn't whether the girls truly lived before. Maybe what matters is the way their story invites us to listen, to wonder, to imagine that the boundaries between life and death, between past and present, might not be as fixed as we think. And as you sit with the story now, let it settle like a dream you can't quite place. A memory you never lived. Two sisters walking hand in hand down a quiet street. And somewhere, just behind them, the soft sound of footsteps that came before. And now, as the last story fades into silence, you're left with something gentle. Not answers, not certainty, just the quiet weight of wonder. Because that's what these mysteries leave behind. Not fear, not confusion, but something slower, something softer. A feeling that the world is still full of places we haven't reached, questions we haven't answered, and stories we haven't finished. From the forgotten footprints on Somerton Beach to the whisper of a hum in the New Mexico air. From a cipher no one can break to children who remember lives they never lived. Each of these tales carries a flicker of something bigger than we are. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply human. We search, we wonder, we imagine. And in that act alone, we keep the stories alive. Whether they're puzzles waiting for a key or simply echoes from the places we don't understand, they belong to all of us now. They remind us that knowledge doesn't always arrive in bright light, but sometimes glows softly in the dark. So, as your breath slows and your thoughts begin to drift, let the questions remain unanswered a little longer. Let the unknown wrap around you, not as something to fear, but as something to fall into. Thank you for listening to Lore FM, and good night.